changes. My chair report, we have a lot to go through tonight, and so I will keep it short other than to say thank you to all the public who has been engaged. There has been a lot going on between e-learning, changes to budget process, budget modifications, which we will talk about tonight. I thank you to our administration and our staff who have remained focused on kids and education. And I know that e-learning is a new mode for everybody, so we certainly have everyone hanging in there with us. With that, I will go to public comment. Everything I have received at this point up to about 5 p.m. If anything's received after that, I tried to get it out in time for meeting, but I certainly will do so either by tonight or tomorrow morning. It has been sent to the board. I do anticipate that we will talk a little more about public comment tonight, just so everyone knows the best way to get that to us. However, just a reminder to the public, when we say public comment and you send in your comments, that does go to the entire Board of Education, and it is part of the public record. In the last instance with grades, we've been quite careful to try not to include any personal identifying information about children, but please know, in general, public comment is fully available to the public, and we cannot always guarantee that. So I think we'll have a little more conversation of this going forward, but the two things to take away is, one, your messages are being received. Please keep them coming. We enjoy hearing from you. And two, recognize that your comments are on the public record. With that, I'll go over to the superintendent.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us remotely and taking hold of your child's computer for a few hours. I welcome our middle school administration to the meeting tonight. They are joining us for their presentation. Again, like the board chair, I'd like to recognize people's feedback and their participation in the process. As we just closed one topic, we open another one up, but thank you for the most recently for all the feedback on the grading system and the reporting system. That was very helpful. By and large, it was well received. Not exclusively, but by and large, I felt it was well received by the community. I want to thank the music department and all the kids who participated in the Darien Young Composers Concert. If you have had a chance to see that, we're certainly got talented kids up and down the system. So it's unfortunate they weren't able to perform in the normal form and setting, but they certainly did the best of it under the virtual opportunity that they had. So congratulations to all the kids grades 2 through 10 who participated. The work on the transportation study for the bus is going to commence with school bus logistics, and we will adjust the schedule a little bit to make the accommodation for some of the time we've lost, but it will be in time. The completion of that project will be in time for budget process for next year and before that. We are resuming some advertising for the special education department chair at the high school. The search for the middle school principal is well underway and in the process. And we continue to screen applicants for the director of music position. I want to thank the Darien Athletic Foundation. They are making some final modifications and renovations to the cross country so that the running area is all consistent. So we've worked through some process to make sure that can go forward. And I want to thank them for continuing to support the kids and finishing up the project, and that should happen early in May. The district, just to reassure people, the district is actively looking at the strategies for reopening when we eventually have to reopen and do reopen, and we look forward to that. The direction about reopening is not clear at this point. The most recent conversation this afternoon was leaning towards hopefully having a decision sometime late next week. But I'm not so sure that's completely solidified, but we'll see. That's the best news we have at this point. Dr. Lemons is looking to re-engage with the strategic planning process as early as next week with an organizational meeting. So I think the schedule will be confirmed tomorrow, and I'll be able to send out invitations to people, and we'll each get the next organizational meeting up and running and try to continue with that process. Thank you to Chris, who rolled out the Blue Wave challenge, and that's underway, and it closes out tomorrow, I think, is the last date. And we do have people who participated, and we'll profile their enthusiastic participation on the district website. I'll leave some of the COVID and e-learning to the first agenda item, I'm sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just a quick correction, because I all of a sudden getting lots of text. It is the search for the assistant principal at the
What did
middle
I say?
school, not the principal at the middle school.
Did I say principal?
Mrs.
No
Summer.
Freudian slip there.
Early.
Okay, it's okay. I was wondering if you were telling me something, Dr. Adley.
Well,
Yeah.
there's a truth in everything it says.
I thought it would get by people, but it did not.
Well, if people are listening, thank you very much.
Yes. I will now move on. It's requested the board approve the following minutes. And I believe everyone was present, so I'm going to try to take them as a batch to save Mrs. Ritchie. It's requested that the board approve the following minutes of the special meeting and executive session held on April 14th, 2020, minutes of the regular meeting held on April 14th, 2020, and minutes of the special meeting held on April 21st, 2020. May I have a motion? Mr. Maroney so moves, Mr. Deneen seconds, and Mrs. Ritchie, I'll let you handle roll call or any opposition.
I'm just going to ask if anyone is opposed. Any abstentions? That passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We will move on. Oh, you know what? I did talk to several members today who would like to discuss public comment and kind of our procedures more fully. So if we could entertain a change to the agenda, and we will make it under item F. We will change that to G, public comment procedures, and then update on the budget request. We'll make that item H. Could I have a motion to do so? Mr. Sini so moves. And a second? Mr. Brown? Any opposition to that? All right, so Mrs. Ritchie will assume that passes and that agenda change will occur. Thank you, everyone who reached out about that issue. We'll move on to item A, COVID-19 e-learning update. Dr. Adley.
So a few matters under this topic. As you know, we started to offer lunches to any Darien student who would like to participate. Lunches have sort of settled down a little bit. We started off in the 50 ranges and got up as high as 80, and we're around about 69 or thereabouts. It sort of settled in that particular area. So that's going to continue to be offered through the period of closure. And we appreciate the staff members who are making that happen at the Middlesex Middle School. We continue to want to thank the staff one more time and the parents, just because this is not an easy thing to participate in as the days go by. So thank you again to the parents for all of your support as you navigate what you have to navigate at home, and also a big thank you to the staff again for what they do, balancing their professional and personal responsibilities. Their efforts are greatly appreciated. We continue to work with the staff and supporting them in the delivery of e-learning strategies, and we thank them for all of their efforts in that domain. And saying that, I would like to we are looking at the moment to provide a little bit of time for the staff for the next level of preparation for curriculum and instructional practices. So that will be coming out shortly of how we would like to do that and build that into the schedule. We have started the use of paraprofessionals this particular week, and I won't steal Shirley's thunder. She'll talk about that in the next agenda item, but that's been I'm sure that is a welcome addition for our families and for the children. And there's a $111 million Connecticut chunk of the our Federal Department of Education's CARES Act, and that really is proportion to school districts in Connecticut through Title I funds. So with the ratio that what we normally get, it seems that we would have somewhere in the region of about $300,000 coming our way. Exactly what it is for and what we can use it for is not completely clear just yet. there's reason to believe that we can certainly use it for some COVID-19 expenses. But we'll look into exactly what the eligibility is for that. But we do know some funds are going to be coming our way in that regard.
Any board questions? Realizing that an update on special education e-learning is the next agenda item. Is there anything for Dr. Adley currently on the e-learning or COVID-19 update? Mrs. McCammon?
Dr. Adley, can you talk a little bit about how you guys are thinking about the efficacy of e-learning, specifically with different populations of kids? I know our youngest learners who don't read, for example, require different kinds of supports than some of our learners who are later in their academic career and able to be more independent. Can you talk a little bit about how you all are thinking about that as a district? And I guess that's my question.
I won't steal Shirley's thunder, because when we talk about special services, we also talk about special service and interventions. So we know it's not perfect, and we know but the education for all the children under these scenarios isn't perfect. But it's certainly the idea of providing interventions for students at their level, where they are, and the additional supports that they need, where we are doing our best to actually support those through the normal processes that we have, although they may not seem as normal in this particular forum. But Shirley, if you want to speak more specifically.
Before we jump to Shirley, but could we talk maybe like our K through 2, like it might not necessarily be special services, but we have kindergarten children who don't read, or
Yes.
it might be a developmental rather than a
Correct.
service issue. How are we handling that?
Sure. Charlie, do you want to jump in with that, or did she jump out? You hear Shirley?
We saw Shirley. Did we just lose her? Maybe how curriculum's being delivered. Oh, Shirley, you're muted.
You're just muted, Shirley. You're just muted.
You're muted.
Okay,
You're
thank
muted.
Actually, thank you all. Good evening. Jill, that was a great segue into my presentation, but I don't want to take away the note of general education also and what early learning looks like. So I certainly would want, Chris to speak to that also, of what it looks like school-wide for all students. And that's probably a different conversation. But I certainly, what I'd like to show you this evening is what we are excited about in doing. But I think what you're talking about, early learning and the acquisition of skills, and what happens when school is not in session for 2 months, and what that looks like is a larger and broader developmental curriculum response, and it requires that kind of proper conversation, because we're mindful of it and know that what that will look like, and how do you catch that? What do you do with it? Where do you take off from? And I think it's many conversations, so I don't want to take Chris's part. Plus, Chris is my tech friend tonight. Okay, just so I'm relying on him. But I don't know, Chris, did you want to add to that before I begin my presentation?
Yeah, I would just add that there are some basic things that are really important for especially our youngest learners, and that's things like having books in hand. And right now, having the physical books in hand is a challenge. So we have a great partnership with the Darien Public Library System, so we have access to more books there. And we've also had our library media specialists have gotten access to so many additional resources for kids. The challenge, as you know, especially for struggling learners, is those students being able to access that, knowing how, and making sure they're being encouraged to access them is the challenge that we face, and that's harder to balance. So that afternoon time that's built into the elementary schedules is really geared toward finding the time to meet with students individually and in small groups to really strategize and target those skills where we're kind of worried that they might be, I don't want to say slipping, but we don't want anyone to be moving backwards. We want to maintain and move forward during this time. So that time is also for specific interventions and special services, but it's also a time where teachers can meet with students, general education classroom teachers individually or in small groups. So I'd say that's how we're trying to do that, and really managing by looking at what are the common challenges that kids are facing. And teachers do talk about that as they still have collaborative team meetings each week. So we are keeping track of all of those things, knowing we're going to have to make really thoughtful, measured decisions about what was very consciously selected to not cover, so to speak, and not practice during this time, and what assessments we're going to need to do to start the year so we have a good idea of where our learners are.
Thank you. Any other board questions? Mr. Maroney?
Yes, can we talk, or do we have any information on what has changed, or what assumptions we made in March, and what has changed as of today? Maybe bigger picture of just, what did we think would work that didn't, or what did we think wouldn't work that has?
Well, I'll say with we learn as we go with the staff. I do think something is some of the logistics. We had to slow up a little bit because we probably bit off just a wee bit more we could chew just right out the door. We have talented people, but we just had to realize that we needed to slow down a little bit. We needed to provide people with an opportunity to do the work and plan accordingly, and that's kind of that's a phase that we're recognizing now, that we need a little bit more time in order to do that. Certainly, everything from the skills to do the work. I mean, this transition, just as you say, very, very quickly into this mode. So to expect that to be just a seamless transition is a big challenge, and just understandably, people are on different parts of the continuum, and we have to respond to that parts of the continuum. Just as some of our services are coming online now too, we realize that there's ways we can do that as we train people and prepare them for to do that. So those are just there's some logistics, some training. Our teachers are getting feedback from the students on how they are doing, and our parents are giving us feedback, and that's been helpful to us in terms of what they're seeing, and providing feedback. Making sure that every parent and every student is receiving direct feedback. So those are a couple of things, and I'll be happy for my colleagues to jump in also if they want to add anything.
I would just add, I think I mentioned this last time, but the amount of technology learning that's happened in such a short amount of time for educators is tremendous. And the entire technology department, they've had a major transition in their job description in so many ways over the past couple of months. So I can't speak enough as a new person coming to the table about how well everyone has worked to do that. So I walked into a plan that's a beautiful plan that was in place, and there is great stuff happening. And the variables that we can account for are what's happening in the lives of the people that have to implement these. So the best plans on paper are what they are, but if you have 3 children that are in your own home parading about you throughout the day, those are challenges that are hard to mitigate and account for. So I'm working hard to really hear the concerns and the challenges that the teachers are facing, knowing that parents are facing the same thing as they're expected to help their kids to learn while they're doing their own jobs, many of them at home. So that's been something that was just impossible to account for because we didn't know what that looked like. We're certainly hearing it and trying to take all kinds of approaches to help that, whether it be self-care activities for our teachers or for additional time for them to work on curriculum and strategize on how they're going to make it through this next phase.
I think
I can just add to that. I'm sorry. It goes back to Mr. Maroney's question also and what Chris was saying. I don't know if it's a silver lining, but I will use that just as a silver lining. What's extraordinary, and I'm excited to present that tonight, is the creativity and the resources teachers have put together. So, the question is, what's different, or what did we not expect? It's extraordinary that within 6 weeks, teachers have learned this new language, have put it together in such a meaningful way. And when you look at some of the artifacts, some of the slides, some of the live engagement they're doing, it is extraordinary how they're able to, in not the friendliest platform, okay, and to have children and adults sitting in front of these screens 6 hours or however many hours a day. It's extraordinary what they've been able to do, how to get through this screen to really engage students in relationships and in learning. So I think that is a silver lining. We wish it would not to happen, but I do think, in answer to your question, that is something that I wouldn't have expected. And I know many of my colleagues feel similarly.
I would say that the school community in general, very much the parents, I want to say that the children too, our students, and our staff who are just absolutely phenomenal. Everybody stepped up. Everybody's absolutely stepped up, as would be expected in this district, and they certainly have not disappointed. That's for sure.
Have we, at this point, do we think all of our learners at some point have kind of live FaceTime with teachers at some point throughout their school day?
So that's a continuum that we continue to work on, and that's it. That is the intent at some point throughout that process, and we have an understanding that that's where we try and provide support for staff where they need that support, and our intention is to define that a little bit more, just to help people. But they're working collaboratively. The staff's working collaboratively with our technology support staff and bringing up the skills. And by and large, I think it'd be fair to say that I'm fairly confident that high school and middle school are relatively there. And we continue to the big preponderance of people at the elementary are there too. But we just working with some staff on where they are at the moment and to bring them along to that point.
Okay. Any other board questions?
Yeah, this is Jill, Ms. McCammon. Just a comment. Again, back to the kids who are in the early grades. One of the things that I continue to hear from parents is because they need to provide a higher level of support to those kids because often they don't read or don't have the executive function to get through their work independently. It is my opinion that across the board, parents of that age group are still struggling with expectations of themselves and of their children. And so I just offer to you that it probably would be helpful to either communicate out or through the teachers or through yourself. But in my opinion, it is still a struggle in that cohort.
Yeah, thanks.
So if I could reframe that just a little bit, Jill, because I think your point, I just want to be careful that we're not claiming we know who has executive functioning skills. I think it's just in those younger grades where it requires more support and more parent time if we're providing parents with any support or training on how to do it. Is that a fair statement, Ms. McCammon? Any other board questions? Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, this may be a little off topic, but I think it's on topic. With the school calendar, I think we now have 8 weeks left, and we have no breaks other than Memorial Day between that. Are we planning on? Would we think about implementing a break or a day in this calendar? Because it's a long run.
Well, certainly we don't have you are correct. Certainly we don't have any built in at this point. That's something I'll have to take under consideration, Dennis.
Although, Dennis, I think you're going to scare everyone listening if you say 8 weeks. We end on June 11th, right?
I meant 8 weeks from our last time off.
Oh, okay.
Well, hopefully we're back May 20th, which I'd like.
So would I be right? Let me put it, Mr. Maroney, I think Mr. Maroney's question is if we were to take a day off, we'd be adding a day to the calendar. So that would be what the administration would have to come back to us on. Maybe those breaks throughout the day are something we look forward to hearing more about.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Mrs. Ritchie.
I would echo Dennis's comments. Just having 3 kids doing e-learning right now, it just seems like it's a long slog ahead. So I don't know if it's a day off or something else, but I think it is something to be thought on by the administration to see if it's something that is worthwhile. Thanks.
Mr. Deneen? Duke, I don't think your microphone is on. You've unmuted, but we can't hear you. No. Okay. We'll try you again. Anyone else have any comments? No, still can't hear you, Duke. Like a bad commercial. All right. we'll catch up with Mr. Deneen shortly, but if there's nothing else, we'll move on to special education e-learning with Mrs. Klein. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. I just wanted to, Chris Tramberg has been kind enough, colleague, to help me get through the technological piece of this presentation. So Chris is going to put the slides up. Okay, and if I can just, my volume's okay though, right?
Yes, your volume's fine.
Okay, great. So if I can just start by saying that, to go back to Jill's, we are excited to show you what specially designed instruction looks like in e-learning this evening. We asked colleagues to provide images of e-learning opportunities they use in their classroom, both live and both recorded. So we thought we'd start this evening with giving you a walkthrough of what some of those opportunities look like. So in the first slide, we'll look at posted slides and live instruction and what that looks like. So we provided a visual support. If you look at the first one, that's Samantha, one of our OTs. She works both at Tokenique with both ELP and children in elementary school. She gives an example of a task at hand of how to make a bookmarker. And in that bookmark, she gives an example of a slide that sequentially outlines the task at hand, gives specific directions of how children can those steps, have a successful outcome, gives a model and posts it. Our providers are also cognizant of what's available in the home. So if you're using crayons and paper and things that are very available, that's an important piece also. So she's able to do those fine motor activities in this example by using a posted slide. To the right of her is Corianne, and Corianne Brown is over at Tokenique. She's doing a direct reading Wilson lesson. And if you look at that, it's hard to see, but she's actually live with her students. She actually is holding up some artifacts also that are dealing with different blends and words that she's working on. And she's able to, in real time, have them respond to her prompts, both visual and oral, and get a sense of engagement in that activity at hand. On top, you can look at Mr. Conrad, and Jim is there. And Jim is a very high-tech person, so I learned this from some of the images provided. So he has his own projector there. And if you look at the projector on his table, he's able to actually project an 8th grade math problem he's doing. His students can watch him doing it, solve the problem. He can change, again, the visual prompt that's there, the stimulus at any time, and they can interactively solve that math problem with him using that projector. And in the bottom right-hand corner underneath that, you can look at Sarah. Sarah Lorello is one of our ELP teachers, and she's actually working on weather slides. She's preparing slides that will teach our earliest learners skills in weather. So those are how we use slides in both posted and live instruction. Let's go on to co-teaching. I have to say this is one of my favorite slides because it's so creative, co-teaching. And looking at this slide, what we really love about it is it's the idea that Vanessa and Lauren are both there. They're actually working on an American literature class. In that American literature class, they're using one of the features of Zoom, which is a grouping feature, and they're actually able to do a parallel lesson using that technology. And as you can see, they're smiling and delighting in doing it. We're able to continue all our work we did with Marilyn Friend by using this technology, and we just have a little co-teach you model diagram to the right of them. Let's move on to recorded lessons and visual support for teaching and learning. We'll start with Lori. Mrs. Wilderworth. Lori is one of our ELP Oxbridge teachers. She's using visuals in a recorded ELP lesson. As you can see, it's a calendar lesson. We're looking at days of the week and month. And she's able to use that in a recorded lesson for students to access at a time they're available. In the center, we have a PowerPoint slide, which is part of a series of different forms of measurement that our special education elementary teachers are able to use. And to the right of that, again, the other part about supporting teaching and learning with visuals is being able to assess student progress on it too. So if you look at one of the syllabication Wilson reading lessons on the right, that's something that teachers are able to provide to their students. So they can either return it in if there's a PDF editor that they can actually use it and return to the teacher. If they can do it on an iPad, they can put in their responses on the screen. And if you don't have that technology, we're able to actually have kids read the responses or dictate them to the teacher live. So it allows for, if we don't have technology to support it, we certainly can learn and understand progress students are making by completing these worksheets. Social and emotional learning. And I think Dr. Adley had mentioned before how essential it is to support all of our learners with social emotional learning. So here I'll start with Dr. Kurtz. Taylor is actually doing a community meeting. All her students are engaged in in a meet, and in that meet they're able to do their weekly community meeting. Below her is Kim Sheehan, and she's one of our psychologists at Middlesex, and she's doing a social skills group, and she's able to hold up any visual prompts she needs to do at that time as well. And lastly on this slide is Eileen Whalen at DHS. And Miss Whalen is able to really have her therapy dog there while meeting with a student. Again, just another opportunity for engagement and really having that time to spend with their students. So for OT and PT and speech and language therapy, many parents had said related services are going to be some of the most difficult opportunities for e-learning. And yet, when you look at this, we're excited to say, I'll start with Heather Neff in the left-hand corner. That's a live lesson. She's working on fine motor activities as well. She has chosen materials in the house that are available, again, her scissors and crayons and cutting up paper plates, to be able to have students participate in a live motor lesson with some of our youngest learners. Right below her is Samantha again, and Samantha is preparing some materials she uses with some of her live lessons and some of her posted lessons for her students. Above her is Sue Atkinson, and Sue is one of our speech and language pathologists. She's able to do social skill groups remotely as well, using platforms, whether it's Google Meet or whether it is Zoom, and she's had success in having engagement with students. And lastly, what you would think is one of the most difficult would be Dr. Albro, who is a physical therapist, and she's found a way to make, as she says, PT fun. But if you notice again, the artifacts she's using are household items, balls, there's a gumball machine, there were different activities there. She's become excited about PT and doing it because she's able to see her students. She can model it, she can coach them, she can have them repeat it, and she's had great success in some of her virtual learning. Paraprofessional support and instruction. So we were able to communicate to parents also in prior written communications, but I did want to just take a moment, if everyone's okay, just to start out by thanking Joan McGettigan, Jeff Adams and the tech department, all the library media specialists, and Marge for helping us coordinate all efforts, because they had in 1 week put together a rigorous 101, 102 tech training for our paraprofessionals who did not have a lot of experience in providing instruction supporting students with digital platforms. An extraordinary effort, and successfully, because our paraprofessionals have started this week in supporting students both in general and special education classrooms. And here you have a couple pictures of some of our paraprofessionals preparing materials. Russell is in the high school core program, and he works alongside his teacher in preparing different opportunities. And you can see to your left is one of our ELP paraprofessionals. And Marissa is also working and preparing some materials and supporting teachers in instruction. Similarly, on the next page, we have an opportunity to see Cindy at Middlesex, who's working with teachers to help support students. And lastly, to our right, we have Amanda, who is doing a read aloud for, again, our earliest learners. And lastly, colleagues supporting colleagues. And one of the things we found, most importantly, of how things are brought together and how people come together, is when you have a common purpose and supporting each other, there have been some barriers that have been taken down, and colleagues have just found ways to support each other. And the first one, we've got Carolyn Hoge, who's one of our CES facilitators at Tokenique. And with her smile, she continues to do all her scheduling, facilitate meetings for staff, and making sure that everyone's on target. To the right of her on top is Christina Ulrich. She's one of our assistant principals over at Oxbridge, and you could see that she's doing a lunch bunch for social skills for students. And if you look at her notes close up, she's doing a lesson on muting, chatting, unmuting, and how to use the technology to support turn taking and participating in that social group. Right below to the left of her is Teresa Fox, our special education chairperson at Middlesex, who provides daily e-learning PD for staff and is always there as support to all of our colleagues. And some extraordinary efforts have been done also. We have a note on the right that Lynn Salon, one of our middle school psychologists, actually provides meditation sessions at 6:30 in the morning for her colleagues at certain times to make sure they're there and feel supported. And we continue to work with CBC for our DBT training for students and for our teachers and colleagues as well. As recently as today, there was a workshop at Darien High School for maintaining resiliency during a pandemic. We had about 25 staff members who were there working with our trainer from CBC. So as we move on to the weeks ahead, and we have also in our outreach to families, just wanted to reiterate our priorities of where we are, in addition to instruction, looking at planning and placement team meetings, what our priorities are. Again, we're looking at our meetings for pre-K through 12. Our meeting attendees will include the required district staff that we have, unless for reasons because of availability, but in agreement with families, there may be excusal of some required members as appropriate. And our priority is because you can see of the timeliness of these meetings and resources available, our birth to 3, transition meetings for our 18 to 21 students, meetings for students who are seniors in high school or aging out, and of course, meetings for students where placement for 2021 school year is being considered. For our extended school year, we actually have put a notice out to family also that our ESY meetings are going to commence next week. Already personnel from respective schools are reaching out to families. Our ES meeting attendees will include parent, building administrator, special education teacher, and any other designated personnel as appropriate. And if we're able to, at these meetings, reach mutual agreement for the proposed ESY program, the district and the parents will document an agreement that will allow us to add that to the student's IEP by amendment. Looking at transition and articulation meetings, the same way from pre-K to K, 5 to 6 and 8 to 9. The same timeline for articulation and transition meetings will be commencing next week. The same understanding of attendees who will be included in these meetings, and the notion also that if we can reach mutual agreement, we can maintain these meetings and update the student's IEP by amendment. I did just want to mention one thing I told Megan Emanuelson asked me just to say that they will also be commencing 504 meetings in the same timeline. And lastly, on behalf of Kristen, Laura, Scott, and myself, we look forward to our continued communication. We look forward to finding additional and new ways to really support our students during e-learning. And we look forward to staying connected to families and working together to realize shared goals. Thank you.
Terry, you're muted.
Okay.
Okay, I wondered why none of you had questions or comments. So first, I'll open it up to board questions and comments. Mrs. Stein.
Thank you, Shirley. That was a great presentation. I love all the visuals because my kids don't let me look at any of their e-learning. Question, are we making plans for ESY if schools don't open? Are you in the process of figuring out what that looks like?
Right now, we're planning in guidance with the state, with the BSE also, of if school is in session, is what we're designing it for.
Okay.
So the latest inclination from the commissioner at the previous meeting we had was to suggest that get ready for e-learning for summer school, which is a kind of a scary thought, to be honest with you. We're looking for further clarification. There was major pushback on that, as you might imagine, but that's not to say that he's going to come out and say that there is no summer school or extended learning, but it got a visceral reaction from superintendents.
Imagine.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Burke.
Thank you for the great presentation. Can you tell me what kind of feedback you've been getting from the parent community?
Positive feedback. We've also gotten, I think very positive feedback. They've been connecting with teachers. They've been responsive. They've been participant. And when there were concerns, they reached out to us and let us know their concerns. One of the areas with our most intensive learners, we've been really successful. And I really did want to pause. I don't have those images in our presentation, but thank you for asking that question. I think they have been extraordinary. Our DLC classes and our more intensive learners, Excel, have been connecting with families, have been able to use these platforms to really connect with kids in an authentic way. So in answer to your question, we've had positive feedback back from families, and when there were concerns, we were able to address them.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Burke.
Questions? Mrs. McCammon.
I think this is a question ultimately that applies to general education as well, but because the compensatory services are likely to be a portion of special ed, I'll ask it here. What groundwork are we putting into place to prepare for how we will be managing the compensatory services process? And by that, I mean tracking, assessment, relationships with parents, which by all accounts are from what I'm hearing, are on the whole going very well. But I just would love to hear what planning is happening behind the scenes so that we're ready, as ready as we can be, I should say.
So the most proper way to answer that, Jill, is we really can't plan until we get back to school and can really assess kids. Until we really know what their present levels of performance are, until we know what regression or if regression has happened or what we need to do. So we do know that we'll have to do some kind of really baseline assessment. We'll have to find out where our kids are, if they've missed or what they've missed, and then plan accordingly. So there really is no way to do it. And that's consistent with the state guidance also. We'll need to be with our kids again to see what they need, because that'll be about planning IEPs. It'll be about what goals and objectives do they need again to really be able to access teaching and learning. So we'll have to look at it. School resumes.
Further board questions?
Yep.
Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, so just a couple comments first. The projector of Mr. Conrad brought back those memories of the old-fashioned facilities and the transparencies, and that was a big flashback, not a good one. But I did think that the home-based PT, is there a possible advantage of having parents being able to record that and to be able to reference it later to help their children, number one? And my second question, more the bigger question, is how are we monitoring our services and feeding back and the feedback loop back to central office and making sure the students are doing the work that is required on our IEP and 529?
I'll do the first question first. We haven't really we actually are not recording sessions right now unless there are teachers who are posting them. I mean, I certainly would share that, but our understanding is that those live sessions are not being recorded this time. The second part is the feedback. I'm not quite sure if this answers the question. There's ongoing dialogue between the teacher and the student and the family. So in terms of how students are responding and planning lessons and assessing students as they go is really done between the family and between the provider. So that's our current form of feedback is really, well, depending on the age of the student also. The older students are giving their own feedback. But parents are an important component of that. But that's how we're assessing how students are working along. Also work samples from students, the exchange of work samples of where they are. We're also holding office hours with teachers so students can drop in general ed and special ed. They're able to drop in if questions about the lesson, if they need further support about the lesson, both with either a resource room teacher or their general education teacher.
Can I pick up off of Dennis's question? In terms of we're seeing teachers utilize some materials or some technology, and with your math teacher, he had something that he could utilize. Is there anything that we're hearing back from teachers that we're thinking we should invest in the event that e-learning does continue, so that we can outfit all teachers with, someone had a great idea and a great piece of material that they've been able to utilize in this immediate situation, but we've learned some sort of lesson that, hey, maybe we should have a few of those on hand so that we can have more teachers have availability to that. Is there any apparatus, materials?
So there is a process, right? The department chairs play a big role in that too, and for coordinating what departments need. And I've actually been through some phases of that, of things that they needed, and could we get them those instructional materials. So that's kind of ongoing, and it is active. And through Christopher, we've been responding to the principals and the department chairs.
So if I could just add to that, both questions. So the two levels. One, we know that on every level, grade level meetings are going on. We have bulletin boards in special education where they're sharing best practices. They're looking at resources they share. So that's on one side. That goes on daily, of shared ideas, and they're opening up doors in classrooms to do that, as well as resources and materials. I think the technology piece, and I'll certainly bring that back to our conversations with colleagues and administrators. I believe they're sharing it among themselves in their different faculty meetings, grade level meetings, department meetings, but I'll certainly bring that back. I was having a conversation with Scott actually when I saw Jim's projector also. That was a really good thing. Teachers would like to have that. That looks reasonable. So I think we should go back and follow up on that in answer to your question, but I think it's happening with resources and materials, but we certainly can look at some of the technology also. Also, just to acknowledge Joan, who has workshops every single day. There are tech every day. I mean, there is an abundance of text 201, 200, whatever, that she does daily, that continues to give resources to faculty and is available. So I think the technology department is really doing that on a daily basis.
Great, thank you.
I might just make a connection to what I said at the start of the announcements. The resource that they're looking for right now is just a little bit more time together to plan for the curriculum and instructional practices.
That might dovetail into Mrs. Ritchie and Mr. Maroney's point, time for teachers, time for students to breathe and regroup as well.
Tara, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, Duke.
I can't hear you.
Oh, wow.
We're good.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Mrs. McCammon.
Shirley, I have a couple of questions about expectations that I've been asked along the way. And I'll just group them together. There's three things I've been asked. The first is, and we talked about this a little bit with general education as well, the expectations around direct contact for elementary school students. I know that we had a lot of direct contact with our secondary school students who already had a lot of that established, and the elementary schools were on a lag. So I would love to hear what expectations have been set for that community. I've had some questions about how, and you don't necessarily have to answer this one, but know in the parent community, there's some questions about how the number of hours in an IEP translate to a shorter day. And then the third question I got was, most parents I've spoken to are a fan of the prioritized PPT process, but are curious to know what to do if they have a problem that would be traditionally resolved via a PPT that is outside of the prioritized list.
I'll go backwards. I'll take your last one first, okay? If there are, and we said that in our memorandum to families also, if there are some extraordinary circumstances or there's a PPT that is essential, and actually it's in Brian from the State Education Department also to look at a time, they certainly should reach out to their case manager if there are extraordinary circumstances. I know parents respect we need to go through our prioritization right now because the timeliness of it, but they certainly can reach out to their case manager to have a conversation. If there's an essential purpose, we are going to post Brian's last memorandum from the state, and he actually speaks to that as well. of, what would that PPT realize and what is the essential purpose of it. So certainly reach out to their case manager to have that conversation. For the number of hours, since I'm going backwards, for the number of hours, we're not trying to match hours of PPT, of IEPs to school closure time. There is no way to do it. Also the governance and guidance of that says to the best of our ability and to the best the student can access that is what we're providing, but we're not looking to do hour for hour. There would be no way to do that. As far as direct contact, that is variable. I think there are two factors. Well, there's more than two. But first of all, it's how long a child can sit on a screen. Direct contact really involves both the learner and the teacher, and whether they're juxtaposing roles or not at that time. It's how long can they be able to really be engaged in a meaningful way. And it also is variable on the level of how skilled the teacher is and comfortable they are with technology right now. And I think after several weeks, we really have come that most of our teachers do feel comfortable using that technology, but it's about assessing, is that the best way to access teaching and learning? Is the child able to sustain their attention and be engaged in a meaningful way? And is there a combination of both direct engagement and some of the other platforms that we reviewed today?
Okay. Thank you very much. And thank you to the staff. I can see some of them personally working very, very hard. So I'm grateful for that. I'm also grateful that you guys put paraprofessionals in place. I've heard good things and seen great things.
Thank you, Jill.
Any other board questions before we move on this evening? Okay, Shirley, thank you for your team. Thank you for mobilizing under these circumstances, and thank you for this update. So we are really kind of up to date on all that we are doing for all of our learners. It is much appreciated.
Thank you. We thank you.
We'll move on to the update on the exploratory model at Middlesex Middle School. Mr. Tranberg and Mrs. Summers.
I'd like to introduce the principal of the middle school. I don't know if Christopher Kittenelly or Shelley to start with, but this is obviously a part of the board goal, so this is the update we're getting.
Yes, as Dr. Adley said, this is part of the board goal. I'm going to put up the memo, and I'll let Shelley speak to the memo.
Thanks, Chris. It's up, I'm assuming. Okay. So as you probably know, this has been a passion of mine for some time, developing with my team a schedule that really enhances teaching and learning at the middle school. So we began, I don't know how far back you want me to go. We developed a 3-year plan. We started by developing a committee surveying teachers, and our plan for next year was to, let me just go back a minute. The goal is also to level the playing field for all kids, giving them equal opportunities for different types of elective. Also for the 8th graders, aligning some of the classes and elective type things that they have in the high school, aligning that for our 8th graders so that they really learn how to make a choice about what they're passionate about, not just what their friends are taking in an elective. Also to give teachers the opportunity to deliver curricular instruction and develop a course in their subject area. So we had a lot of goals in doing this. As you know, we have a typical 8-period, 42-minute block schedule, which doesn't allow time for any typical middle things like looking at things in an interdisciplinary manner. So after surveying the teachers, we found that their biggest concern was, or biggest wish was to rotate order of the classes so that if a child had algebra 8th period, that wouldn't have to be for the whole year. Those academic subjects would be rotated throughout the week. So that's where we were going to start. We were also going to introduce a lab model like they have in the high school of a smaller class in math to pre-teach, reteach, and work in a small group with math students as an elective. And we also wanted to add conversational Spanish in the 6th grade to give students whose schedules might be full the opportunity to have some interaction and experience with a world language. However, there was a pandemic, and that sort of made us put the brakes on things, though we will go ahead with our 3-year plan, the second of which is to experiment with team teaching, not co-teaching, but team teaching, and a variety of things, as you see in the memo, to increase the number of teachers teaching 5 classes, and also to give more variety to the elective choices that students might have. However, I feel, and my team feels, that next year would probably be the wrong time to implement that. Transitioning students back to school, transitioning our 5th graders into 6th grade will present its own challenges. So we would like to pause this goal for now. We do have the schedule built in both ways, in a regular traditional 8-period, every period's the same, and also as a rotating schedule. But we didn't have the opportunity to develop the curriculum for those new electives that we wanted to put in. So obviously that couldn't happen at all. But we think that it would behoove us to just push everything back a year, so that next year we would we don't know what school's going to look like. We would just stay the course with our traditional schedule, start rotating and piloting some different types of experiences for students the following year. And then the 3rd year out, we would really try to incorporate our capstone project into some interdisciplinary blocks, combining like an American Studies kind of block, combining English, social studies into a period that would rotate throughout the week. We don't have that built out yet. Again, our committee obviously hasn't met, and the committee was volunteers across all of the grade levels and disciplines that have been working on the model. We have a number of constraints at the middle school. Size is one of them, lunches is another. If you want to, in the downtime here, build us another cafeteria, we would be happy to take that on with you. But other than that, lunch kind of rules what we do and how we plan, because we have to feed our students. So that's sort of where we are right now. We're just holding on to what we had and not trying to bring new things in, because we do understand that we are going to have to really take a look at what the beginning of the school year will look like when it happens. That's what I got. You're muted.
Alan is my Chris. He's in charge of my technology. Thank you, Mrs. Summers. Any board questions? If not, I have one. Why would we not, or could we, I understand pausing, especially on some of these new electives, but this question of rotating the calendar has been out there for a number of years, and mostly because we found some students that, at the beginning or the end of the day was not, let's say, their time, and they had an academic class that they never quite had a change to that, and that might suffer in kind of how they learn. Why would we not still rotate the schedule, even if we're not introducing new classes?
Well, I think my thinking was that, say school begins on time and students haven't, in September, and students have been out all this time, that we are going to have to do some social time, let kids come back into school. And I think that we're going to have to address some social emotional learning in a little more depth than perhaps we are now in our social emotional learning program. And also just to let teachers have the same old for a minute, if you will. We talked about even just maybe looking at staying the course for the first half of the year and then seeing how that would look. But to throw this in a very confusing situation, especially for our 7th and 8th graders who are used to the schedule, I'm sure that the kids would adapt more readily than the teachers. The truth is we haven't worked on it all. We have it built to rotate it. So it's just my gut that less is more, less change might do us well in a really tough transition. I don't know how it's going to look. We've been back and forth on this because we do have it readily available. Mary and Dana have been working on both of those things, but it does involve a lot of, newness for teachers also. That's really the only reason.
Okay, board questions or comments? Mrs. McCammon.
Just to comment, thank you for your thoughtfulness, Shelley. I do think this is a time where we have to think carefully about what we undertake. And so I appreciate you being really thoughtful about that. And, it's sad to not be able to do what we thought we were going to do. But I think going about this slowly and carefully and keeping the balancing act at the forefront of this is really important. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Mrs. Ritchie.
I just wanted to thank you, Shelley, for this. I think when we do get to do it, it's going to be exciting. And if there's a way to implement it gradually next year, that would be great. But obviously, we don't know what next year is going to look like. But I think it sounds pretty exciting for the middle school kids.
It's really an interesting piece of this is that I've been examining this for years and I'm very excited about it. So I was probably the most disappointed. Well, I can't say disappointed that this whole pandemic happened, but that we're stalled right now. But right before this all happened, before we closed the school closure, a lot of principals were reaching out to me, principals from like Guilford and way upstate who were rethinking that and seeing where our thoughts in Darien, because we're such a high performing school and we have such a supportive parent base, what my thoughts were on it. And so we had kind of formed this really pretty cool little cohort of very diverse communities in trying to figure out what's best for middle school kids. How should we look at this? But it was really wonderful to have these conversations where we don't have to be stuck in those 8 periods. And it really kind of confirmed everything that I've studied and everything I knew about this. So I will be anxious, and I am very anxious to move forward on it when the time is right.
Great. Any other board questions? Okay, so thank you all for this plan. I think the middle school certainly will be better for it when we can enact it. But if you are not ready, we understand, and we look forward to an update, and we kind of understand where it is in terms of a goal and objective. Thank you. We'll move on to the update on elementary enrollment for the 2020-2021 school year. Mr. Rudel.
Sure, I will present the memo real quick. Can everybody see it?
It's coming.
It's coming. There we go.
Okay. So elementary enrollment is at 291 students currently. This is an increase of 37 students since March. The one area to highlight is Royal. It gained 22 students and is at 69 students enrolled. That does trip a class size with the current maximum class size guidelines of 22. At first grade, Hindley is above projection. Everything else is relatively in line. Moving down to second grade, everything continues to look good, and we're at 330 students, which is pretty much where we expected to be. Third grade, we are slightly below at Oxbridge, but we are ahead at Tokenique. Projected was 346. We're actually currently at 348. At fourth grade, We are a reduction right now at Tokenique of 1, total enrollment at 372 versus projected at 367. And then in 5th grade, Hindley is slightly below the projection at 71 against 74, which would be currently 1 less class size. So while it's still early, through April, grades first grade through 5th grade, we are 1 under the budgeted class size.
Thank you. Any board questions? Seeing none, we appreciate the tracking, and we will monitor that closely. Mr. Brown?
Sorry about that. In terms of Malone and McBroom and their projections, when do we hear from them again? And the reason I'm asking that is there's some anecdotal evidence about families leaving Manhattan or other parts of New York City heading for the burbs. Any idea when we might hear more than just whispers or rumors, or get some sort of number what that cycle is to hear from them?
Sure. We do have in the budget next year to bring back Malone and McBroom to do an updated enrollment study, including a look back at what the actual enrollment will be for next year.
Thank you.
It'd be in the fall.
Sorry, any other board questions? Okay, with that, keep us updated, Mr. Rudall, and thank you for your work on it. We will move forward on discussion and possible action on the elementary conference days for the 2020-2021 school year. Mr. Tranberg.
I'll take it off, Mr. Tranberg, because since the superintendent made an error in one of the dates, I'll take responsibility for that.
Okay.
So my understanding of conferences, and we had long conversations about conferences, is that they are looked at independently from the calendar. I don't know if that's my understanding. That's the practice. I might suggest moving forward if we would look at it when we're looking at the following year's calendar, build it all into the same type of discussion. I think unless there's a reason for it, I think it would naturally go there. So the memorandum that you have, the date for the second trimester should really read 17, 18, and 19 as opposed to 16, 17, and 18. So I apologize about that error. That's my error. It's 17, 18, and 19. So what is new here? So we lived through a couple of conferences and the snow days and so on that we had. One, we've built in some snow days actually into this to actually give parents an understanding of if we missed one, what would happen. The teachers will also be doing a conference in the evening. So on the 18th, there will be conferences in the evening also. So that gives the parents an opportunity to attend an evening conference, and we'll see how that goes. I think we've had some feedback that would be useful. We have that opportunity to do that now, and the teachers want to do that, so we thank them for that. And there'll be an opportunity to see if parents actually come to attend those evening conferences. So the major changes here are an evening conference and build in the snow dates for if we miss a day, to give people an advance notice.
Great. Mr. Brown.
Hi, thank you. Dr. Adley, quick question on that. Will the teachers be doing these face-to-face, or will they be using some of the alternative meeting technology we've been using, such as Zoom or Google Hangout, to meet with the parents if the parents request, or if teachers feel that's wise?
I think you cut out, but I think I got the gist of it. Will it be in person, or will it be using the technology nowadays? Is that the question?
Exactly, yeah, online. Yeah, online conference.
Well, actually, I think if we go back to Mr. Maroney's discussion, this actually opens up some other opportunities that perhaps I wouldn't say we weren't available of before, but maybe weren't just quite as robust and as up and running at a stage of being readiness. So it perhaps opens that up. That hasn't been the discussion thus far, but it is an interesting question. And certainly if parents miss conferences, I know teachers often on their own accord meet with them or telephone them, or otherwise this could be a new mode of doing that if that's the case. But there's no conscious decision to build it in as a remote activity or a virtual activity. But I can see where it could potentially. Thank you.
No, I mean, Yeah, and just a slight follow-up to Shirley's great presentation earlier. It's encouraging to see how quickly the teachers and administrators and paraprofessionals and others have adopted to these new technologies. So certainly hope that any chance we have in the future to use them, now that people are familiar, will be able to do so. So look forward to hearing more on that.
Thank you, Dave.
Any other board questions? I'll just say, I think the evening edition, the board's heard about that for years. I know that is in the teaching contract, some nighttime for. So I think parents will be excited to try it, and hopefully it works both for the district and for parents. But certainly yet another example of how we're kind of willing to adapt to changing needs within the community. So thank you for sorting that out, and thank you to the union for sorting that out. Any other questions, or are we ready to move on? We do need to
Tara, are we
actually
gonna
vote
vote
on
on
this. Yeah, sorry. So may I entertain a motion to set the elementary school conference dates as outlined and amended in the memo dated April 27th, 2020. And again, that amendment is March 17th, 18th, and 19th. Mrs. Stein so moves, a second by Mr. Green. Is there any objection to that motion? And no one abstaining? So that motion will carry unanimously. Thank you, Mrs. Ritchie. So we will move on to an update on fiscal year 20, fiscal year 21 transportation contracts. Mr. Rudolph.
Sure. I will bring up the memo real quick. Okay. So as we mentioned at the previous board meeting, the governor did issue an executive order 7R, that does require districts to continue paying transportation costs at a newly negotiated rate for the period of the closure. We have been going back and forth with First Student. The rate that they've currently provided is 95%. There are two things really working against Darien in terms of the reduction of the rate, and that is primarily the bus garage. Since we do not park our buses here in Darien, there is a cost of renting the facility in Stanford. And additionally, the contract that we have did call for new buses, so there are financing costs associated with the buses. Districts within Fairfield County have typically seen anywhere between 90 and 100%. Some districts are getting reduction in their rate at the moment. So one of the things we did was to approach First Student about a concept of potentially paying in full this year in exchange for a newly negotiated transportation contract. So if we were to agree to the 95% and we were closed for the entire school year, we would be looking at savings of approximately $49,000. So in an effort to almost reset the contract, one of the things we approached them was, if we were to pay 100% of the contract this year, could we get a flat rate increase for next year and then reset all the future rates within the contract? So that would result in a savings, if we can get this agreed upon and approved, of about $118,000. That would be against the budget that was adopted by the board. That would be taking the rates down from $472.50 next year per day, or $491.40 per day per bus for home to school, down to $472.50, which is our current rate. By doing this, this would also allow us savings that we can use to apply to the bus that was added post-budget to service the Renshaw Road, Fitch Avenue area of town, which is currently outside of the walk radius. The other benefit of doing this would be, because we would be resetting the rates every year, we would be paying a lower rate than we otherwise would within the contract. So we would achieve what's called cost avoidance. So every year would be paying less than we previously would have. So the cost avoidance over the life of the contract would be about $340,000. So while this isn't agreed to in principle, we did want to give the board an update, at least as to where we stand regarding First Student and some of the things that we're trying to explore at the moment.
For Mrs. Ritchie.
So thanks, Rich. That actually looks fantastic. Have you had any preliminary discussions with them? Any indication as to whether they would agree to this?
Sure. So the regional manager of First Student was very open to the concept, as was the district manager. So what they've done is they've taken the concept and kind of moved it up the chain of command. So that's really where it's standing at right now. And so given a lot of districts within Connecticut are using First Student, a lot of it is a little bit of a slow negotiation given they are bogged down with a number of other districts at the same time. But at least our on the ground manager as well as the regional manager here were very open to the idea.
Okay, other board questions? Okay, seeing none. So Rich, when do we have to, I mean, we have payment at some point. When do we think either of these negotiations are wrapped up, or do we start to get to the point where we need to make a decision one way or the other?
So we have held payment. We're not making payment for the month of April, and we won't make the payment for the month of May until we have a decision, at least in terms of what way we will go. Our hope is at least within the next few weeks to decide, and given that we're holding payment, it gives them a little bit of an incentive to make a decision sooner than later. If the decision is that they're open to this, then the next step would bring this to the board for consideration and approval.
Okay, so we'll have another chance, but is there anyone who has questions now as the administration moves forward with this plan? Mr. Sini.
Do you think there's any way we can get it by May 6th?
We can try. I don't know if we can guarantee it, but we can try.
Any other questions? All right, so Mr. Rule, please just keep us as up to date as you can, and maybe some more pressure of letting them know timing is of the essence for us as we go through our budget process.
Sure.
So that will move on to the new item of G, public comment procedures. This was brought up, I think Mr. Deneen and Mr. Sini had some conversations about it, and they brought it to me. It dovetailed some of the conversations that Dr. Adley and I were having of how to make sure that we have public comment both recorded well and accurately. We certainly want to hear from the public. I think that has always been a priority of the board. We value how engaged our public was, and to make sure that they understood that they were commenting on the record, which I think we have clarified at the top of this meeting. But I'm happy to open it up to Mr. Deneen or Mr. Sini first, as they had some thoughts, and then to the whole board.
Tara, thanks for allowing us to put this on the agenda. I think the only other issue that we are missing in this distant learning aspect is when we have in-person meetings, the public can hear what everybody else says. When we're asking the public for written comments, they go as part of the record, but there's not an easy repository to look at all the public comments. So I was wondering if we should put it in our minutes as an appendix item, or post them on the website or something like that to make all the comments accessible to everyone going forward.
So I think we typically would. I think we, and you point out quite wisely that as we're learning as we're doing this, what we found with grades is there was a lot of very personal information, and rather than hiring lawyers to redact, basically we made note that of all the people who made comment, those records are available should they need to be reviewed, and then we would have to maybe go through that process. But I think going forward, and maybe with this regular reminder, we would attach emails to all minutes as public comment. I personally like that idea. I'm happy to hear from the board. I think it's probably the most reflective way if anyone wants to go through and kind of see what people are sending in. But I think it is probably valuable to remind the public that is what happens with their emails.
Yeah, I agree. I think we used to do it back when we had the stenographer. Like when I first got on the board, I remember we had something like that. So I think it's a great idea.
Okay. Is there anyone who's opposed to that? And I just again offering that we will remind the public that they are making public record, because I think sometimes people send emails and they don't realize that that's going to be public.
Tara, can I add to the conversation? My understanding is that when if you're interested in submitting testimony to the legislature that is private in nature, but you think germane to legislators' understanding, that there is a way to mark that it's to be held confidential. So that makes it more complex for us. But perhaps there's a way that I do think there are cases where a parent may wish to share with the board, but may not wish to share with the whole public. So if we could find out if there is a mechanism available to our board, I think that.
So there are occasionally, we do have people who say that this is not for the record. It is either for the superintendent. Occasionally we have people who identify that they have personally identifying information that they're sharing for educational purposes that they do not feel is for distribution. And so we can remind people of those, but then I think to Mr. Steeney's point, it is something different. Those parents wouldn't be coming up to the podium. So, and maybe we can find a way to remind parents of saying, mark it public comment. But what we can't do is set up a system that in any way violates FOIA, that someone says what they want and then they don't want it on the record. So there's specific reasons for which things are held confidential. Mr. Burke.
I agree with the concept. I think it would be great to put it in the minutes and just to advise the submitters that it will be public record unless they mark it or something confidential. But I would err on the side of transparency and letting the folks know what's going to happen to their submissions.
If I could just add one thing, the one problem with the minutes is there's a lag. And so when we have a pertinent item, like I think this last agenda item is going to be, it might make sense to get the public comments somehow up on our website before the minutes get filed. But I'm up for, hearing ideas around that issue.
So I think we had a lag in the very beginning. We now have, I think the Board of Ed generally turns it around in 24 to 48 hours. We had a little bit of a lag while we were setting up some administrative staff with social distancing. But generally, I can assure you that Mrs. Ritchie has the minutes oftentimes by the time I get home at night. And Nadine turns them around within 24 to 48 hours. I think in a specific instance, maybe like this one with the Board of Finance, as I do for you guys, and I try to consolidate comments, I think if the Board of Finance is open to it, I'm happy to share those. If it's budget related, and the budget is at the moment in the hands of the Board of Finance, I don't think anyone would be opposed to us sharing, but I'm happy to hear it. It informs both them and us, and I think often people are very used to writing into the Board of Education. So they might not be as familiar with writing into the Board of Finance. So I'm happy to send all those budget related emails over. But as you saw tonight with public comment, we had some budget and some other issues. So that would kind of be on joint issues to share information, especially it is public record. But I do think we typically, I'm comfortable with minutes because typically I'm seeing them up within 24 to 48 hours.
Okay, so they're going up as draft minutes then. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Mr. Maroney.
Just a point of clarification. So we're going to do this going forward, or are we going to post the old emails that we've had online as well?
So I think this is going forward. Currently in our last batch of minutes, you see a list of names. Many of those contain student information. So rather than incurring expense to redact them, I think we would wait for a request and redact as requested. But going forward, especially with this reminder to the public, we will include public comment in the minutes.
I agree.
Okay. Everyone comfortable with that? All right, thank you for the item because we've been struggling with this too, and it's good sometimes to get it out as a discussion point. And moving on to what I think we've all been talking about now for about 4 or 5 days. An update on fiscal year 2021 budget requests from the Board of Finance. Why don't I throw it over to, why don't I start with the process? Because I've gotten a couple questions on the process, and I did talk to council on this, just so we understand where we are. And then Dr. Adley and Mr. Rudel, you can go kind of through the mechanics of where we've been. The budget is in the hands of the Board of Finance. the Board of Finance heard from the first selectman that you would like to explore either a 0% mill rate increase or a flat budget, which is the same dollar of taxation as last year. What they have asked us to do is they came up with an allocation. They came up with what they thought was needed in the budget, and they asked us to report back to them on 2 scenarios. They have not actually issued a cut or a modification to the budget. They would like to know what these 2 scenarios would be. That is something that we will go through with them in their work session. I don't know where they will come out. They could come out with a cut, an addition, or no change to our budget. That's their deliberations. Once they make that cut, being formed on what our priorities would be and how we would move forward, the budget then goes to the RTM. The RTM does their deliberation, does their work. We always in June have what we call a true up on our budget. That would be any adjustments. So any modifications to our budget, the Board of Education would then kind of be made aware of and vote on in June. So I've had a lot of questions. Do we vote tonight? Do we do this? Right now, we are just exploring these scenarios so that we can help inform the Board of Finance. Should they move forward, this is what they could expect in terms of our priority decisions on modifications.
Tara, could I make one clarification?
Sure.
It's my understanding that although the first selectman mentioned a flat budget, this is entirely a Board of Finance request. So it's not coming from the first selectman's office, as I understand it.
So I'm just taking John's words in the meeting that he had a request from the, but you are right. Procedurally, this is the Board of Finance issues to the Board of Education. The Board of Selectmen nor the first selectmen issue modifications to the Board of Education budget. Okay, with that, so we all kind of know where we are. Oh, Mr. Deneen?
Hey, Tara, could you just clarify too that what happens at the RTM meeting and what they do in terms of the vote?
Sure, so the RTM and they have voted to continue on in the process and not cede their authority to the Board of Finance. Or I'm sorry, the governor issued guidance, so they feel that that vote was no longer necessary, so they will continue on in their process. They will report out on our budget. Now, the Board of Finance has the ability to both add or cut from budgets. The RTM can only cut from the budget. So just so you know, procedurally, it's not as if the RTM restores money to budgets. Now,
but they can cut in addition to a Board of Finance cut.
Yes, they do have the ability to make additional cuts. They can make decisions around, bonding, mill rates, all that. None of that is a specific necessarily add to the Board of Education budget. They're not empowered to do that.
Right. Just so we're all on the same page. Yep. Thank you.
Okay. So with that, in terms of specifics, I know Dr. Adley issued us a memo today that was very informative, and I'm sure we'll have lots of discussion surrounding. So I will hand it off to you, Dr. Adley.
Sure, thank you. To the members of the public, you should, or at least this document that I'm looking at with the board that they received this afternoon, that should be available online to you as we speak. So it should have been published this evening. I hope you find it there. So I'll just give an overview, first of all, just about the big picture of this, and then Richard can just walk you through the line items. So as you know, as the board chair just mentioned, we have a charge of looking at a reduction of 971,000 or 1.6 million under the 2 scenarios. We do have a forecast of shortfall of 287. So we essentially have to make up 1.2 million or 1.9 million. The direction from the Board of Finance was generally through deferrals. You could argue that the superintendent has taken this a step further in the sense of to try to portray the picture. If we had to make those particular benchmarks along the way, what would that entail? So you've got 287,000, which most of that is directly due to COVID-19 expenses for the most part. We do have some unknown expenditures, which I think you would anticipate. Some of those we have mentioned tonight in terms of costs for special education due to closures. We do have an uncertainty around the excess cost entitlement adjustment because that has been changed. So we are concerned about that being adjusted for the fall. Year-end adjustments to the ECS, the cost sharing grant, is a possibility based on where we end up with excess cost and expenditures. And just basically anything else to do with getting ready. We talked about enrollment tonight. While we're not seeing, to go to David's question, why we're not seeing currently a pattern of that would suggest an influx of students or families. That's not to say that that would not happen. I would say just right off the bat, I would not be looking at using budget controls given some of these uncertainties that we have to deal with, and I really don't know until we actually start the fall, and if and when we do actually start the fall. So the strategies that we looked at here, and I want to thank my cabinet team for all of their work. I just want to recognize that, I mean, this was Thursday night, and we're trying to turn this around, and certainly we'll do so. But behind this is a lot of detail, and moving forward, there would be some other details should the board decide it needs to go down that avenue. So here's what we looked at. We looked at the use of a non-lapsing fund account, which we have that's available to us through the town holding that fund, should they wish to do that. We looked at deferral capital items, and in fairness, the Board of Selectmen or Board of Finance did talk about deferrals primarily. So that's why I say you may see that we've administratively taken this one extra step, but just to make it very clear of what reaching those benchmarks would actually mean. So we've actually tried also to then look at how would we reduce operating items or defer operating items, whatever terminology you would like to use. And then finally, if we needed to make the shortfall up, whatever that might be, what programs and staffing would that require? So as the board looks at this tonight, look, when people talk about cutting this amount of money or us or having to reduce that, I take that extremely seriously, as you would expect I would, right? So you could say in some of these items, why did you put those items in there, right? And as a reduction or a deferral? Well, the process we went through is we developed the budget. Things are fluid and things change. So we wanted to be honest to that process, first of all, by going through all departments and looking at, has anything changed from the budget that honestly we could recognize here and we could include, because every dollar that we save here will prevent us touching programs and staffing. So that's a process we went through. We also made some suggestions, and some suggestions that even came up in the budget process. So I would recognize as we talk about some of these line items, the board may or may not disagree. As the board agrees or disagrees, it then changes the bottom line number. So this summary table at the bottom, it's just a big overview to the documents that follow. So essentially, we've looked at 4 scenarios, 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B. And really, the 2 scenarios take the A to start with. 1A and 2A take the position that a non-lapsed account may be available to us, and that would be supported. The board would support that, and the Board of Finance would support that, the maintaining of a non-lapsed account, for which whatever balance we have at the end of the year, that would be deposited there for use for identified items, and we have identified those. 1B and 2B, under the 2 different scenarios, assume that for whatever reason that is not in place, therefore we have to make deferrals. And then when you look down at staffing and or programs, those are numbers there that range from, just at a high level, 358,000 to over $1 million. Where in all honesty, we're saying administratively we've looked at this, administratively we've put forward some deferrals, some capital, some operating, and even some staffing, where that made sense in the sense of going from 4 to 5 classes where we know we have a staff member that applies to. So we've tried to do a real sort of look at this, and actually probably took it a wee step beyond what the charge was. But I will say this, and once you get down to the 358 makeup or the $1 million makeup, I'm just going to tell you, I don't think we can make that up. And if you do make that up, you'll be impacting, you'll see in this, you'll be impacting things like, we had the middle school here tonight, so you'll be starting to dismantle the middle school team model. You'll be impacting all those programs. I don't need to name them just yet, because my read tonight will be to see what the board would like to do in terms of these particular variables, but you'll be impacting all those special programs that this district values and relatively sets us apart from other districts. You'll be impacting directly athletics and extracurricular activities, and or anywhere between 3.5 and 10.5 teachers, depending on how we approach this. So that's kind of, if you had to go to the next level, I'm saying you can't go to the next level without severely impacting the program. So that just needs to be stated and be understood very clearly. If you're wondering, well, why did you not delineate it any further than you're describing it? Well, I have an ethical responsibility. If I'm going to mention any specific programs, personnel, I have a responsibility just on a humane level and an ethical level to talk to those people individually, first of all. We haven't done that. I just want to reiterate the charge of this. You cannot underestimate what it does to the culture of the school. People look over the shoulder. I don't want to unnecessarily put positions out here. People understandably look and go, well, now I'm completely worried in this vacuum. And even if it plays out where we don't reduce those, they'll be thinking next year, well, they were on that list last year, so I'm going to be on the next year. So deliberately and consciously, for 2 reasons. One, most importantly, ethically, I shouldn't do that. 2, we don't even have the time to do it given the time period. But should the board want us to do that, we would do that, and we would be ready probably by Monday to outline those in detail. But I'm telling you, those are the things that are behind those numbers that have already worked out. I'm hoping that we don't have to go down there, because if you do, you're significantly changing the very infrastructure. And I just know is that it hasn't took me long to know what people value in this district, right? And the programs, that's what brought me here. Hopefully I'm not brought here to just sort of start to take it apart a little bit. That's not the charge. But anyway, that's the overview. And I'm happy to entertain a question about an overview to start with, but it'll be also important Richard can just walk us through the line items. Do you have any bigger overarching question before we go through the line item, or would you like to go through the line items first?
Mr. Sini. John, you're muted.
Sorry. Just one question on a non-lapsing account, just as a point of procedure. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it will require the Board of Finance to implement that tool, correct, Rich?
Yes.
Correct. So the Board of Ed would have to approve it, but the Board of Finance would have to approve it as well. And if the Board of Finance does not approve it, we would not have access to a non-lapsing account. Okay.
And then the second follow-up, has anybody had a discussion with anybody on the Board of Finance regarding the non-lapsing account?
The chair was kind enough to give us notice of that meeting, and we mentioned it. We certainly mentioned it to him in that capacity as one potential way of doing this.
Okay, thanks.
But there's been no, to be clear, there's been no formal communication about that from either direction. Nor did we speak in the board that they would like to do that. So,
before we go too much further down the conversation, am I correct?
Jill, hang on 1 second. It's just hard because multiple people raise their hand. So Jill and then Katie.
Before we go too much further, I was just curious. My understanding from, I thought, an email trail I saw was that we were thinking also of having a second meeting after this. That tonight is just more preliminary. Is that correct? And that the board will probably meet again a second time to discuss this.
So I can't see the board. If you want to go down the line of further reductions here, it would be absolutely essential from you. But I'm not ready to talk about the specifics of that. I am in the sense we have it ready. I'm not in the sense that I don't know if it's necessary. I don't know if the board wants to do it. I'm not going to rule stuff out if it's not necessary to do that. But so if you did need that, you would clearly need for parents and community members and the board to consider that reflectively, as much reflective time as we have between now and next week.
So Jill, I think it really is determinative, and I would anticipate yes, but that's a board decision, that we'll go through this. That will help give Alan direction. So depending upon the outcome of this conversation, that gives him direction for further work. If what we're saying is, no, this is it, there's nothing else we're doing, well, okay, fine, then there's no need to meet. If out of this conversation comes, I think you need to look here, you need to look there, you need to hit this mark or that mark, then absolutely we need Alan to go back and come back to us with everything we just asked him to do, the work we did. So I find it
I think we'll
unlikely.
need to know. I think we'll need to know about the non-lapsing account anyway. So I'm anticipating we need another, but fair point.
Mrs. Stein.
Hi, I just, before we start, have an overarching comment. I watched the Board of Finance's meeting the other afternoon, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tara, but I was really disappointed that we didn't have a seat at that table. I was surprised that Mrs. Stevenson was present. Were you invited to that meeting? I think it would have been a nice opportunity for you or a representative from the board to ask questions about the formulas they developed at that point prior to this meeting, because I have a lot of questions, and I was very surprised, and I wanted to put that out there, confirm that we were not invited to that meeting.
We were not invited to participate or given a line into that meeting. The chair of the Board of Finance did call Alan and I earlier in the day to let us know that the meeting was occurring and that allocation amounts had been decided. I believe the Board of Finance had a smaller working group that came up with that, but no, we were not invited or part of those conversations.
Thank you. It's really disappointing. I'll just say that.
Mr. Burke.
Hi, thank you. Looking at Dr. Adley's memo and work, I think it shines a flashlight onto our budget that we have recommended and passed with our group, in demonstrating that it is a very tight budget. I look back at the memo from Chairman Zagroski, who wrote that the overarching theme should be to look at initiatives to defer or reduce, that's a quote, and to also quote, do not materially impact the delivery of education. And that's the direct quote. So I don't know if it's cross purposes to suggest two numbers with the guidance that we not materially impact the delivery of education, because from where I sit, I don't know where anything other than deferring projects that won't impact safety, and that's presumed, won't materially impact the delivery of education.
So that's a fair point, Mr. Burke. And certainly I'm not, because I don't just play those games, I'm not being inflammatory with the numbers, but there's no way getting down to those, whatever those balances happen to be, without materially impacting programs for children. And I respect and acknowledge and appreciate the comment from the chair that he doesn't want to impact those. I'm just being very clear to people as we go through this process that to go any further than that actually will. There's just no doubt about it. And I've given you the categories that we've identified, and those would be them. So that's why a wee bit tonight I'd like a bit of guidance from the board. I see, do they want to go to even think we need to do any more than that? You may even disagree with some of these line items that we have since the budget looked at and said that, okay, I would respect the board saying one or two of those line items may be materially impacting it. But we have tried to be fair and looked at this charge as fairly as we can in respect to taxpayers and everything else and the requests. And to give the board all the information it needs to make the decision it needs to make, and to try to be creative and actually solving the problem.
Mr. Deneen.
Thank you, Tara, and thank you, Dr. Adley and Rich and all the people that did a lot of work over the weekend. I know that. And I think to Mike Burke's point and the overall conversation, I think we have to go back to that we started at zero with the budget that we built. And I think Alan, as a new superintendent, has a good eye to look at how that budget process went. And I think everyone put a lot of time in building that budget. And I think if you think back to the whole budget process, we had a lot of conversations about what Alan presented, I think, in a very thoughtful way, which included changes to administrative assistants and other type staffing models. So I think in his, first blush with this, he spent a lot of time looking at efficiencies. I think to the comment he just made, it makes sense. Things have changed to continue to look at efficiencies that we can get out of the budget. And I think that's what we should continue to do and educate the Board of Finance so they feel they have the information they need to make their decisions. But I think if you look at the information from the Board of Finance, and it's a goal that would be nice to hit, but it is a goal that clearly from these numbers is we are not able to hit without impacting education. And I think our goal is not to impact education. So if we look at this from an efficiency standpoint and come up with some numbers, if we look at it from a deferment standpoint in terms of capital projects or other projects that we know we can defer, but let's be real, the dollars are going to come up again the following year or the year after. So, that would be my approach. And I also think we should not fool ourselves in that when guidance comes out from the state or from the feds, we could have, additional costs in social distancing with classroom setups, with bus configuration, with more people coming into the district that are not going to private schools or that are moving into town. So, continue to look at efficiencies and continue to look at deferments, but not impact anything from an education standpoint.
Okay, do we want to run up Mr. Maroney?
Yeah, I would just like to echo what Mrs. Stein has said. I think it's unfortunate we didn't have a seat at the table. And I understand this is now the Board of Finance's budget, and this is more of a courtesy that they're letting us come and work through these numbers, because they could just come back and say, this is a number you need to achieve and goodbye. But I think in the spirit of communication and collaboration, they've opened us up to us. And I think we need to take advantage of that as well and come back to them and look at the formula that they created and point out the flaws that our capital budget is very low. The Board of Selectmen is very high. And yes, our operating budget is much higher, and therefore they factored that in. But can we look at just, as Mr. Sini sent an email earlier today talking about the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009, and we deferred our capital projects then. Why can't we look at our capital projects and do a reformulation of this process as opposed to just coming in with straight numbers based on our operating budget? Because I think where, to Mr. Burke's point, and I've been using this analogy today, is that there comes a point when you can cut off part of your finger and you can still survive. But I think we're going to start going into the hand or up to an elbow, and it's going to really impact services. So I think we can do our part and cut a finger off if that's a right analogy. But it's going to hurt. But I think we could do that, but I don't know that we can go further than that.
Mr. Sini.
I just want to make something clear. Those Board of Finance meetings are public meetings. If you want to attend them in this e-learning environment, you can just call and get a number to call in. I don't know the record whether or not Mrs. Stevenson was invited, but the fact that we got a heads up and didn't attend is our missed opportunity.
So John, I will say, and this wasn't my discussion point tonight, but I am going to disagree there. if we receive an agenda or a link or anything, we're more than happy to invite. I would have, those allocations were set at that point. I don't think that anyone in this working group did anything other than put their head together and try to come through what's the financial interest of the town. I did watch the meeting live, but I think just like, I think it's disingenuous that somehow it's our fault for not participating in their meeting. I think we sent it out to the whole board to watch. I watched it live. I took notes.
No, I just want to clarify. We've heard two board members say Mrs. Stevenson was invited and we weren't. We don't know the circumstances of that. So I want to put it out there that it is a public meeting. Any of us can obtain the call-in number if we so choose. I watched it, but let's just be careful how we frame it.
But I think when we're talking about our budgets and work sessions, but we can have differing opinions on it. I think everyone's had a chance to air theirs. So was there another hand? Okay, so let's go. Oh, Mrs. McCammon.
Yeah, I just, in terms of the spirit of the cut, sort of before we dive in, I agree with everyone that education is critical, and we know our teachers and our administrators have been some of the folks in this instance, the front line. So I don't think anyone is excited about the specter of an economic downturn. And certainly this is a very difficult and unhappy exercise. However, I think the spirit of this is that we are at the beginning of both an economic and a health crisis that have both costs we can anticipate and costs we can't. And my understanding is that the hope is to make the burden a little easier for the taxpayer. I have heard the industry standard that maybe 25% of small businesses may not come back. We know that bank lending is down. We know that we've certainly seen the stock market. We've seen unemployment rates. So while I think no one wants to cut anything that imperils children's education at this stage, myself included, I do hope that we can approach this with the cooperative notion that this is about doing what we can for taxpayers who may be facing personal difficulty over the next months or years.
So I think that's the spirit of Dr. Adley's memo. And so is there any other specifics? Mrs. Ritchie?
No, I was wondering when we were going to start actually talking about what's in the memo. I just have some questions specifically.
Yeah, so I think now is a great time to do it. So Dr. Adley or Mr. Rudolph?
I'll let Rich just walk through the line items, and that will give you a wee sense of how we approach this.
Sure. So as Dr. Adley mentioned, we are anticipating a shortfall in the existing budget of $287,000. This is primarily from the fact that we're not expecting to be able to rent out our fields during the summer due to social distancing, and the likelihood that Darien Summer School either won't happen or will be significantly under-enrolled. So we laid out 4 scenarios. We took the 2 scenarios by the Board of Finance of $971,000 and $1.63 million, and then subdivided them into either using a non-lapsing account or not using a non-lapsing account. So scenario 1A is for the $971,000 plus the $287,000 shortfall, so a $1.25 million reduction. It does include the use of a non-lapsing account. It is important that if a non-lapsing account is used, it is preferable that it's only used for non-reoccurring expenditures because it is a non-reoccurring source of revenue. Some districts within Fairfield County, such as Westport, Stanford, Norwalk, Brookfield, and Newtown regularly use a non-lapsing account every year, not just in the year that we're currently in. So the items that we would recommend to go into a non-lapsing account include the iPads from RC15, and then the math textbooks for the middle school for $170,000 in RC19. And then we would recommend putting a number of capital items into a non-lapsing account, including the middle school security cameras, the lockdown enhancement, the replacement of the 2 vehicles, the replacement of the library carpet at the high school and the middle school, repaving the access road at the middle school, and then the curbside and blacktop at Hindley, and then the paving at Tokenique as well. All told, that would be $880,000. We did base the amount of the non-lapsing account on the last financial report that we gave to the Board of Ed. The next item would be a deferral. We did recommend deferring the HVAC design. The Board of Finance did list this as a considered bondable item, but considering this isn't the actual construction of HVAC and it's really just the design and the development, we do think that could be considered as a deferred expense, and that was $300,000. So the next section would be to look at operating reductions. We did issue an RFP about a month ago or so for trash removal services. The district has had city carding for a number of years, and so we did make the decision to issue an RFP. The bids came back about $29,000 lower than what we currently pay and what was in the budget. So that would be a reduction in RC12 of $29,000. A reduction of $40,000 in software maintenance to remove Lightspeed, which is a web filter. The state of Connecticut is now offering web filter services to school districts for free. So that would be a removal of that item in the operating budget as well. A small amount of $300 of an elimination of dues to IMG. It's really a membership that we don't really have to have. There was a bid for auditing services done. The bid was complete and is $457 under budget. So we just listed that as a small dollar amount as well. Jeff and his team did do an audit of our telephone system, and it did result in monthly savings of $650 or $7,800. The one caveat is currently our provider is Frontier Services. They did declare bankruptcy. So we don't know whether or not a different service provider will change costs. So we are basing this on what our current provider is, but we do feel that's a reasonable reduction to the operating budget. All in between the non-lapsing account, the one capital deferral, and then those operating items, it would be just $227 shy of that $1.258 million.
Can I just jump in real quick? I'm sorry, Rich.
Sure.
I just wanted to go over the operating reductions. Are those reductions that are happening no matter what? So we're going to see those savings either way, right?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. I just want a clarification on that. Thanks.
Sure.
Hey, Rich.
Yep.
Can you in the deferrals and stuff on capital, like paving the access road and curbs and other paving and stuff like that, can all that be lumped into a broader bonding for the town in terms of asphalt and paving and stuff like that? I know Mike Lynch works with the town on the cost of asphalt and stuff, but can all our paving and work like that be lumped into a townwide bonding program?
So there are a lot of municipalities that do bond paving just as a general practice. So that would be, if the Board of Finance was open to that, that could be a consideration.
Thanks.
Sure. So scenario 1B is the same reduction amount of 1.25 million, but this assumes that there is not a willingness for a non-lapsing account. So rather than funding some capital items from a non-lapsing account, we would consider them deferrals. So we would recommend deferring the carpet replacement at the high school, the carpet replacement at the middle school, the repaving of the access road at the middle school, the curbside and paving at Hindley, and the widening and the paving at Tokenique. And then again, the HVAC design at homes. All told, those would be $474,000 worth of deferrals.
Before you move on to the operating side of this, you'd be recommending 1 year deferral. So we would see a bump up in our capital the following, significantly so, which is, we have a large capital next year, right?
So correct. So typically if you have a deferral, you can only defer it so much until you actually need it. So we would see a spike in all likelihood in the capital budget for fiscal 22, unless we were charged with obviously making more deferrals given the uncertainty.
Okay, and as a reminder, these were all priority ones. We only accepted priority ones in this year's budget. Correct, Mike Lynch?
It's correct.
Okay. Okay.
Can I just make just a quick tutorial that essentially what's left in there for capital includes the security. We did not in any way compromise the security improvements we were making.
Okay. That's important to know. All right, Rich, I'm sorry, you can continue with the operating reductions.
So the next one would be a change really in accounting structure for parking fees. So currently the district does collect parking fees. It goes into the student activity accounts, and the board is credited with a portion of those parking fees, about $11,000. the typical practice within the DIRG, whether it's New Canaan, Westport, Ridgefield, Wilton, or Weston, is 100% of those funds is credited to the Board of Ed, and it's represented as a contra expense on the budget. So this would not change the amount that we charge students, but it would reflect the change in which 100% of those fees would be allocated to the operating budget. That would be a change of $14,300.
And Rich, the balance then of those dollars would not go to students or their activities as it typically does in that activity account, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So the next item is we did take a look at the elementary allocation of resources formula. We did work with our principals to kind of maybe try to work from the bottoms up about what that would look like. So we did make a reduction of $23,000 across all 5 schools. This is really looking at the ratios we use and the dollar amount per student, looking historically at what we had spent, and really ensuring that we have enough of, whether it's foundations or handwriting with tiers, having those resources still available. But the variability that we see every year in the budget between actuals and budget typically is the classroom libraries. And so adjusting the formula for that variability a little bit. The next item.
Hang on, I see some questions.
Yeah, I just, listen, just say, here's an item, for instance, that I know it did come up in the budget many times, right? And our response back to the board was that we modeled the unit prices for the various textbooks and so on, and it seemed to play out that was reasonable. I'll just be honest with you. You could be wrong, I could be wrong here, but if we're trying to do as much as we can, I think it's okay in certain areas to go back and look at certain categories. This is definitely testing the theory, right? The math of the calculation works, but the balance of, this is primarily classroom libraries, hasn't played out that way. And this is honestly, yes, testing that theory. I could be wrong in it, but.
Mrs. Stein.
So, Dr. Adley, we have talked about this a lot, and when Mr. Forshop, usually he's the one presenting, we talk, is it enough? You know, they seem to justify that they need it. I guess my question is, if we're reducing it, are you thinking about a reduction in 1 year, or this is going forward? Is this, you know, as Mr. Deneen said, you know, sort of an efficiency you can do this year or deferral, but you'll go back to the other number next year, next budget cycle?
That's the gentleman who was referring to.
Luke, when he presents the budget.
Look, sorry. Well, Katie, if it settles down and our hypothesis here is correct, then that would be moving forward like that. But I would say this, it could be wrong, and I may have to come back again and say, look, listen, we're wrong, I need to adjust that. I think that's part of the honesty of the process.
It just seems significant to me, given the conversations we've had during budget time.
Yeah, I guess my question would be on this is part of the reason those formulas were in place and looked at so significantly is for a long time, parents were supplying books and materials in the classroom libraries and were being asked to maintain the classroom libraries, and the district felt that that's a district responsibility. So are we saying we think that this is a cut where we can maintain our classroom libraries, or that we're going to go ask parents to replenish the libraries?
It would be to maintain the libraries.
Okay. Okay. Unless anyone has, Mrs. Ritchie.
I'm just wondering, is there a formula that will be used for allocation to the elementary schools? Is it just divided by 5 and everyone gets that cut? Or is there some sort of formula that's going into that for each school?
So it is a similar formula to what was used. We did adjust each grade level's dollar amounts down based on what we saw as the classroom library variability, whether it's in kindergarten, first grade, et cetera. And then adjusted some of the percentages between some of the other categories based on where we've seen spending, which is why you see small pluses and minuses across some number of accounts.
Okay. Please continue.
So the next item would again be another really an accounting change. A number of districts record gate receipts as a contra expense in the board's operating budget. New Canaan, Ridgefield, Weston, and Wilton all do this. So currently the gate receipts from sports are collected, they're put in the student activity accounts. This would be collecting those gate receipts and then depositing into the board account similar to those other districts.
Sorry, I have a question. Sorry.
Stein.
So when I look at the changes to the student activity funds, I just want to make sure when you're taking things out as contra expenses, you can still pay for the things that we're historically paying for, senior send-offs, whatever it is. I mean, we're taking significant money out of.
So there has been, just looking back at last year, there is still a balance within the student activity account, the high school account, where these items are held. So I do believe there will be revenue available to purchase some of these items. It just might be recorded differently.
Okay, so revenue is an interesting word around student activity accounts. It's typically parent fundraising. And so I think we just need to be aware of that. And that conversation might need to sit with us, and maybe that's part of why we come back for a meeting, because that's usually parent fundraising. And I know we're looking to lower the taxes, but it's feeling a little kind of similar to something like pay to play. If what we're saying is we're going to fundraise money and then it's going to go into the board budget. My other question would be, and I know we have a year off from Turkey Bowl next year, but we brought Turkey Bowl home for the following year, and gate receipts usually go to offset that. We would just need to be aware that if this was an ongoing change, we wouldn't have that offset, so we'd see a corresponding increase maybe every other year.
Correct.
Okay, Mr. Maroney, I'm sorry, you had your hand up.
Yeah, my simple question is just on the gate receipts, is that's I was reading the NFL is thinking that they may not start until November. So that's assuming we're going to open up in September, correct?
Correct.
With sports.
Correct.
Any other questions, Mr. Sini?
Was there any consideration for pay to play or student activity fees that were like that were instituted in 2010 or 11?
So I think John, the answer to that is, like, we have already said that we would like to look at a number of issues. That's one of the issues under the umbrella of athletics, an extracurricular that we said as a board we would like to look at. I honestly don't know if we can make adjustments to these potentially, or not, should the board decide not to do that. But to go out and now and develop a whole process and the policies that go with that and the thoughtfulness that needs to go with that, I wouldn't want to jump. I think I'm already taking liberties perhaps with some policy sort of practices. I wouldn't want to take a massive leap, and I think that one would just be a bridge too far at this point, to be honest with you.
Understood. Your plate's pretty full right now. Thank you, Alan.
The only other thing I'd ask Mr. Rudel, as we look at touching student activity accounts, that's also typically the account we have if a child or a family is unable to participate in something. So I want to make sure whatever we do, should we choose to access that we leave enough for those students who their participation or their ability to participate like their peers, they still have that opportunity.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
I appreciate that clarification and that advocacy. Okay.
Refuse collection. Let's talk about that. That's a little easier.
That's the same item from the previous list. It's again the trash removal contract that we put out to bid. It's about $29,000 less. The next item is different from the previous list. It would be to defer the maintenance equipment that was scheduled in RC 12. Those were auto scrubbers, snow blowers, and a leaf blower. The next item again is similar to the previous list, the software of the web filter. Again, the $300 in dues. The next item is new if we do not have non-lapsing account. There was $170,000 in the budget for a 6-year subscription for middle school math books. This would change the subscription from 6 years to 3 years, which would result in a $39,000 reduction. The next item.
Mr. Earl, can I ask a question about that? I could be wrong. My memory could be off here. I thought that we were doing the 6 years because there was savings going for a 6-year subscription versus a 3. If that's true, what's the savings we're giving up?
So the longer you go out for a subscription, the less the growth is. So at a 3-year subscription, you're only getting $39,000 off your bill. One would think if it's $170,000, you'd get half of that. So you're obviously not getting the half of that. That would normally be 85. So you're giving up, $45,000, $46,000 in savings by cutting it into 3 years.
Okay. Sorry, continue. I'm sorry.
Tara, I'm sorry. I just wanted to add to that. I was the one that brought that up during the budget discussions. And I think at that point, we got a pretty good explanation as to why it didn't make a whole lot of sense. But I appreciate you guys putting it in there. But I was definitely convinced that it made sense to stick with the 6 years. That's just my opinion on that. Thanks.
So the next item would be to keep professional development at RC19 flat. That would be a reduction of $12,000. The federal government did give guidance that districts can carry over Title I expenditures for a longer period of time than they're typically able to. So we would expect that we would be able to use a portion of that carryover money to absorb that $12,000 reduction. The next item would be to defer the revision of the chart of accounts in RC20. The next item, again, we put out the auditing services were put out to bid. It was $457 less. The next two items assume that we are successful in our negotiations with First Student. And then the final item is, again, the telephone audit of $7,800. So all total.
I'm sorry, Rich. Can I just go back to the First Student contract? Yep. So that could be savings that we realize under scenario A as well, correct?
If we are successful, correct.
Right. So, I mean, that could be something that we see both in A and B if we're successful.
If we're successful, correct.
Okay. Thank you.
So all told, those operating items are $348,494. We did list two staffing reductions. The first is $56,313 at the high school. If you recall in the budget, we did budget 2 secondary teachers leaving and not being replaced due to the new teacher contract, changing the class load from 4.5 to 5. Currently, we do have 3, so that would play into that role. Additionally, one of the in-house transportation suburban drivers did leave the district. That position was originally 261 days. We recommend to make that 238 days, similar to the other driver position. And then just the associated health insurance benefits with that teacher position. So all in total, that was $77,231. So if you take the capital deferrals of $474,000, the operating reductions of $348,000, and the $77,000 in staffing, it's about $899,000 of reduction. So we would be $358,000 short of that number.
Can I just back up one sec?
Sure.
Can we go back to the staffing reductions? So I'm just clear. Are these savings we can realize again under both A and B?
They are.
Okay. So what I'm getting at is maybe we should see some of the things that are showing up in the B scenario carried over to the A as well, if there's savings that can be found in both scenarios.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Yep.
All right. Thank you.
So, Dennis, I'm sorry.
Yes, and in that light, and maybe this is a question for Mr. Lynch, but in A, we have the 2 vehicles for roughly $99,000, $49,000 each. That's in the going into the deferral account. Can we those are, to me, those aren't safety issues as opposed to the enhancements to the Middlesex Middlesex cameras and the lockdown procedures. Could we defer those a year, or are they on their last leg? I realize they're old vehicles. I mean, it's almost 100,000.
Got my microphone working now. We could defer the pickup truck, but the Blazer has to be replaced.
Maybe 50,000 there then, or 49.
Okay, Mr. Brown.
Thank you. I I just want to say, first of all, thank you, Dr. Adley. Thank you, Rich. Thank you, everyone else who's involved in doing this very thorough analysis of a turnaround for a difficult ask. Following up on 2 points. One, Dr. Adley, you mentioned the staffing or program to be determined is the greatest area of sensitivity here. Obviously, we'd like to not touch that to the fullest extent possible if we wind up having to go through with this exercise. And also, Ms. Ritchie mentioned something, the comparisons between the A lines and the B lines. And I'm just looking at the budget scenarios in the A lines and the B lines. And I see the non-lapsing fund is obviously the biggest difference between the A's and the B's. But then I look further and I look at the capital column and I see $174,000 in the assumptions between the A's and the B's. And some of the capital items that make up that $174,000 are items like the carpet or blacktop. And I'm not sure if we shouldn't see perhaps a line that includes the maximum value there with the non-lapsing funds. Also looking over at the operating, the 348 versus the 309, I see the difference there to be the $39,000, which is in the textbook. And so if you made those adjustments in the 2A, your column for the staff programs goes to being 353,000 to 135,000, a fairly significant reduction of over $200,000. The other thing is we, towards the end of our budget review process, had some items, for instance, deferrals of uniform, wrestling mats, other items that kind of came down the wire. We looked at many of those as possible potential items to add. And, again, obviously, I'm sensitive. I'd like that staffing number to be as small as possible, so we can get it down to say 100 from or 130 from 350. That'd be pretty big change. If we could take out the wrestling mats and uniforms, we might be able to make that number something quite small from where it's standing right now.
The simple answer to that is that we've tried not to impact the kids' programs at this point. Without disclosing my hand, those potentially are in the next version should we need to go down that way, or they could be pulled into this version should the board want to do that.
So I think, and actually watching the Board of Selectmen meeting was helpful because they actually went through this process last night. I'm sorry, yeah, last night they went through it. And there was a comment like we shouldn't rehash our budget necessarily. If we need to find deeper cuts, Mr. Brown, that might go there. But I feel like, and even in Mr. Zagrodzky emailed right before the meeting saying like their intent is to see what we can defer before we hit programs and staff. So I think we should at least start in that vein. And then if we have to make deeper cuts, maybe we go there. But I don't know that I'd want to rehash the budget necessarily.
Understood. And obviously, some of the items here were not in the budget. And as we've discussed, things have changed. I just mentioned that list because they were some of the items where they perhaps were not as strong candidates for funding as some others. And they did make their way onto that list. So that just seems like low-hanging fruit or a natural place to evaluate.
Mrs. Stein.
I have to disagree with Mr. Brown. I think they're very strong items because they were items that we had lengthy discussions about and felt very strongly that they should be included in this budget. A lot were curricular uniforms. We went over, at length. We fought hard for them. I just caution us sort of opening up sort of like we did on cut ad night. I mean, I'm not comfortable with that at all.
Mrs. Ritchie.
I would just add to that. I mean, specifically when it pertains to the wrestling mat, for me, that decision was a safety concern. And that was driving my reason for supporting that issue. So I think if we're going to start rehashing all that, we're going to have to start talking about why we put it in and now why it should be cut. So I think let's just stick with what we have right now. Thank you.
So let's go for a second. Let's go to 2B because I don't think we've finished the analysis there of 2B. So 2B, if we were to accept everything that you've put forward, if I'm reading this correctly, you still see a significant shortfall. And I know, Dr. Adley, that you are not ready necessarily to identify where the staffing would come from, but it sounds like, and I think we've all read this memo going through it, the highlighted area are extracurriculars, programs, and staffing. And so if we were to play with these up and down, and be it uniforms, a wrestling mat, or whatever, in some ways those are rounding errors on what we're doing, right? So we're really looking at some point, if we do this, cutting into the meat somewhere, and the board would have to allocate where, those three areas. And so I don't know whether, because they show up in each of the next scenarios, after we go through these, we should, at least as a board, decide if those are really the areas that we're doing, or if anyone has any thoughts about that.
Well, I have a thought.
Oh, Dr. Adley has a thought. Let's give him a thought, and then I'll look for hands.
So again, this exercise that we administratively went through, we went through it with integrity. I would ask, and I respect David's contributions there, but I would really ask, let's not go towards the programs. This is administrative, honestly, a good record, a thoughtful recommendation to bring back to the board. If the board doesn't like stuff on this, then take it out and add it to the bottom line. But I wouldn't begin in. I honestly would implore you, let's not go down that road into these programs, right? I actually don't think the Board of Finance wants to do that, so let's not do it. If you do, it's going to be painful, right? So I would try and work within the scope with some counsel from the board as to what it wants to take out or otherwise. But that would be my intent here of really like not going down that avenue, Mr. Brown.
Mr. Brown.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I was asking if that had been considered yet. So I understand that obviously it is not, and it's not the favorite approach. That's fine. Again, I think the bigger question is regarding the capital and operating columns between the A's and the B's. And I think that with a goal in mind of not reducing the staffing or programs, the 353 target can be reduced by 213 by using the maximum capital, which includes the carpet, blacktop, and some other items in there, and by including the textbooks and the operating. And so you take your 353 number down significantly to 100,000 something item, which again, keeping in mind your guidance to minimize the reduction of programs, I think that would go a long way to achieving that goal.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, this to me goes back to what I was saying earlier, is I think this needs to be a dialogue between us and the Board of Finance. And, you know, they've given us a number to get to, you know, but I think we can go, I mean, we can come back and at least in my view and say, you know, look, we've scrubbed this budget. I mean, literally we're going down to $457 in auditing services. And we've gotten, and if we take Mr. Brown's point, we can get to somewhere close to $1 million reduction. I mean, I think we're showing good faith in doing what we can. We've cut off, you know, going back to my analogy, I think we've cut off a couple fingers. It's going to hurt. It's not something great, but I think we can make it work without affecting student deliverables drastically.
So how then, and actually, Mr. Cini.
I just want to say, I think the good work of the administration has accomplished what we were tasked to do by the Board of Finance. And we almost got down that wormhole, you know, kind of rehashing the budget, and I'm glad we didn't. So in a way, you know, I think maybe this is a proposal for the process, but maybe we sit on this for a few days, allow the public to comment, maybe, you know, have a little more time to look this document over and look to refine it and finalize it for submission for the May 6th deadline that they give us. But I think in my mind, we've accomplished, and I'm reading Chairman Zagrodzky's reminder, you know, that he sent late this afternoon, that we've accomplished kind of the task. And ultimately, they're going to give us a number, and we're going to have to then come back if there is a cut and rehash the budget if there is a reduction, and that reduction is ultimately adopted.
Okay, Mrs. Ritchie.
To see the process through, we really need clarification on this non-lapsing fund, and if that's even something that's a possibility. I will tell you, from listening to the Board of Finance meeting, it sounded to me that it was their intention that every dollar we return to them would be put into the town funds and not returned to us. So if they are in favor of the non-lapsing fund, that would be something different than what they said during their meeting. So I think we really need to have clarification on whether they would actually support this fund. I think it's a fantastic idea. I fully support it. I thank you, Rich, and I thank you, Dr. Adley, and everyone else behind the scenes for the incredibly hard work in such a short turnaround that you've done. I really thank you very much.
So I think the non-lapsing account clearly is a huge factor here, right? I mean, because it really does determine which puzzle pieces we're looking to move. I do think some of these other reductions, what we need to be careful, or we need to be mindful of, so we don't put the Board of Finance in a bad position, quite frankly, or us, is we're going to set the priorities, but we're not going in with a list to the Board of Finance that they're picking and choosing from. And it's a dialogue like, I like this, you like this, you know, I'll take 1, 2, and 3, do you want 4, 5, and 6? Because they don't have line item veto. So what we need to really identify for them is like, look, these are the priorities in priority order if you're to make a cut, so that you're aware where we feel we need to go in this. And so I think that's just a little bit of a different tenor. So I don't know if there's anything, Mr. Rudel, as you go down, you feel like you need to explain. I do think that with these cuts, it'll be important for the board to think about them, sit on them. How do they feel about them? We do have some things that we're changing practice. How do we feel about that in the moment? We're changing formulas. How do we feel about that in the moment? And then we are going to need some clarification from the Board of Finance. Is this enough? And then how to have that conversation about what are priorities after that. And I think to Dr. Adley's point, he's going to need a little direction there. So some of you, sure, Mrs. McCammon.
I have a statement and a question. The first thing is, I think we want to be clear that there may be both unanticipated costs, such as costs of cleanup or compensatory services. Duke mentioned this earlier, and also unanticipated savings. We have no way of predicting those in this moment. So I just think it's important for the public to be aware that we understand these things may happen, but there's no way to budget for them right now. So we're budgeting as if we're going to run a school system in the world we understand, or traditionally. The second thing I wanted to ask is, Dr. Adley, I think embedded in the numbers is sort of how you're going to approach curriculum in the coming year, a little bit. Like I see the flattening of professional development, for example. Piggybacking on Ms. Summers' conversation about having to take a look at what they realistically can move forward with and cannot. While I have no desire to touch program for the sake of it, I think there may be things that we necessarily have to adjust to. We know that we have foundational skills for young kids that we're going to have to make sure that they have maybe not gotten during this last third of the school year, and that there will be curricular adjustments accordingly. So based on the fact that we know we're going to have to take a look at our curriculum, how are you approaching the curriculum budget for the coming year?
I could let Chris answer that, but I think from my perspective, you could see that as a wee bit of a deferral also, Jill, just a sort of hidden deferral, not consciously, but a lot of times the way we use our fund for curriculum writing is, as you know, it's a live curriculum. It's rotational in terms of what needs to be done. So those things might be put off a little bit more, while the issues that come to the table in terms of what accommodations and changes we need to make to the current curriculum to modify and move forward, maybe take priority there. So
I think that, just reacting to both comments, I think as a Board of Education, the one thing we need to ensure is curriculum. And so, and this is why we have flexibility in our budget, because the curriculum might not look like exactly what we laid out in January, because the world has changed, right? But I wouldn't want to shortchange that RC, because the world has changed, so the curriculum needs have changed. But I would think that would be the one area where, as a board member, I think that's pushing education forward, whatever forward means next year, that I would look to protect.
I agree with that, in that I think that curriculum is critical. And we must absolutely make sure that we have the right staffing in place to make sure that kids are getting the skills and the information they need to proceed as we want them to through their academic careers. However, I do think we may have some programmatic elements that by necessity we cannot move forward with at this time because we need to go back and reestablish some missing skills. So I'm just asking that we take a look at that as part of this process, not because we want to, but because we may have to put some things off.
Thank you, Jill.
Okay, Rich, do you want to continue? Was there anything, what do we need to know going forward? Or you feel?
Sure. Just very quickly, so 2A, $9 million reduction. It's the same items in the non-lapsing account as the other scenario. So the non-lapsing account would fund the items. We would just obviously be funding them differently. And then the same capital deferrals, and then the same operating deferrals that you saw previously. The difference is obviously, as Mr. Brown mentioned, the $39,000 for the textbooks. If we could ideally get the 6-year subscription, that would be the preference, and we would have that in the non-lapsing account. If funds are obviously of a scarce resource, the 3-year subscription was put as an operating reduction. And then the staffing reductions are identical. The difference is the gap obviously would change. For a total reduction of 1.5 million, so we'd be about $353,000 short. And then in scenario B, assumes no non-lapsing account, so we would defer a lot of those capital items again, as opposed to funding them out of a non-lapsing account. And then the operating reductions stay pretty much the same as what you saw in the previous ones. The only difference is, since there's no non-lapsing account and the reduction is bigger, the gap to fill is obviously bigger as well, a little over $1 million.
Okay, so board thoughts and direction for the administration.
Is there any way that we can communicate, Tara, actually you as chair, to Mr. Zagrodzky as chair, and ask him his view of the non-lapsing account, and maybe we can start to whittle our strategy down there if we were to
Sure.
get it.
I'm happy to. I'm happy to. We began that conversation, but I'm happy to follow up.
And then 2, you'll get an answer whether or not to continue down that road, or we can wipe 2 of these scenarios right off the outline. And as I stated before, I think we've met the Board of Finance's needs in outlining, what the impact of the students would be through these cuts, and go from there. But with a second meeting, of course, and public comment in between.
I saw another hand. Mr. Maroney, is that a hand?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm using left hand now. I think Ms. McCammon hit on a point that I think we need to really drive home here, is that, I think we're talking, I think we've done, and I need to back up a step. I really want to thank the administration and Mr. Rudel and everyone for doing the work, and all the chair people who've gone through to scrub this budget to get to this number. I think it's outstanding. But I think Jill's point is, we've really affected student learning for a third of the year. And now, we're talking about affecting it even maybe more so the following year. And now it's not even a third of the year. Now it's going to be another school year that we're contemplating, if we have to do scenario 2B, talking, over $1 million out of our budget. And yes, we have a big budget, but it's still a massive number that we need to really contemplate, is this what we want to do for the children? And understanding that, to have a zero tax increase is great, would be wonderful for all citizens, but it's still a number that you're going to have to come up with. And is that sacrifice of zero worth the education for, 2+ a year and a third going on, that you've lost that work? Is that worth that, to have that zero-based increase?
I saw more hands. Mr. Burke?
I'd like to echo my thanks. It's substantial work, and it's a unbelievably important work product that Dr. Adley and his staff has created. I think going forward, I think we were asked for a sort of if-then statement. If this is the number, then these are going to be the things that we need to contemplate, whether it's there's a the non-lapsing account, et cetera. And I think we've set out those scenarios. So I don't know the benefit of going too much farther at this point. I think we're delivering the message that these are the things that we can do in these various categories. Now I think we have to have a better sense of what the Board of Finance is looking at now that they know that this is the cause and effect of the various scenarios.
Okay. Mr. Deneen?
Yeah, I echo everyone's comments on the work. And then just to follow up kind of Jill and Dennis too, I think, if summer school does not go off and the students that do the extended school year, the impact there is unknown into next year in terms of the cost of what we need to get those students, to the right place in terms of their educational learning. So, I think that's something that's key. And then I'll just go back to my original comment. I mean, great work. I think the goal here was to educate the board, which I think you did, and thank you very much, and to educate our partners on the Board of Finance as they go through their kind of deliberations and thought process. I think the key is the lapsing fund, to John's point. We need to understand that. If we can understand it in short order, it helps with the rest of the work we have to do. I think this also demonstrates the work that goes on through the year in terms of Rich talking about renegotiating the trash contractor and saving money there. So there's ongoing operational efficiencies that happen throughout the year. We should continue to look at those and see where we can make progress, and look at the nice to haves that maybe can be deferred or get some more efficiencies out of that. And then I think on the capital front, just work with the Board of Finance on what can be bonded and what can be deferred. That's my take.
Mrs. Stein?
Thank you. I echo my colleagues' comments as well. And the one thing I would add is that I think we need to remind the Board of Finance, in looking at capital deferments, to look at our capital budget the next 3 years out. The numbers are significant. We've had this conversation. In fact, we kind of pressed Mr. Lynch and Dr. Adderley to accelerate this year anything we could so we could even out, like flatten the curve, so to speak, right? So I just would caution not looking at this in a vacuum and looking at our budget for capital, particularly several years out.
Mrs. Ritchie?
I agree with that, Katie, and I just, again, there is this bubble of CapEx that's coming down very, very shortly within the next year or two. The other thing I would like to just bring up, which other people have brought up, is there's so much uncertainty with what school is going to look like, what the expenses are going to be for us, these unknowns, and I'm very concerned that there's going to be more than we realize. And I hope that's not the case, but I'm just concerned, and I think it's something we have to keep in the back of our mind as we keep moving this process ahead. Thank you.
So, Mr. Maroney, I see your hand, but just quickly for me to pick up on Mrs. Ritchie's point, I apologize, I'm disagreeing with someone, and I didn't write down who, but I wrote down the comment, so I apologize to disagree and not be able to tell you I disagree. But I don't think we can budget for a regular school year. I think that we know, in all likelihood, the school will not be regular. We don't know the extent of the impact. However, I would ask the administration as they go through this not to cut so closely that we don't have some room to adjust. I think if we have significant adjustments that we could never anticipate, the Board of Finance in the town of Darien has always supported education, and we will find a way to make that work. But let's not cut so close that we can't adjust in a real moment as we need to. And I think that goes to your kind of unanticipated cost, Mrs. Ritchie. We can't balloon this, like we don't know anything, so we need a blank check, and we can't just say it's going to be regular because we know it's not going to be regular. Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, just a point of clarification. If we defer the home's HVAC study, that would, in my mind, defer the home's HVAC program, which was slated for 21-22 of 4.2. So that would take our budget for that year of roughly 7 million down to 3.5 million. But then to the point, our 22 budget is roughly 6, so that would go up to 10. So we'd push it off for 2 years, but we'd still have a bubble at some point, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so next steps, Dr. Adley, what do you need from us?
Well, certainly we need to have a discussion with the Board of Finance Chair to see if they're open to that. My general sense is I'm not being, at this point, coming back with any further reductions that are going to impact the program. I don't think that's what I'm hearing. So I just want to be clear that I'm not hearing to come back with those reductions that are going to impact the actual programming of the kids. So that's what I'm taking away from this until we find out the next incremental step in this, whether the Board of Finance is open to that non-lapsing fund.
So let me be clear then, because I'm the one who will be in that hot seat, is that what we're saying is, one, we're going to find out non-lapsing account. I'll get on that tonight if I can get that email done tonight to Mr. Zagrodsky, or a phone call tomorrow. Two, we may then be considering going to a scenario with the Board of Finance where we're saying we've made these cuts, whatever they end up to be, or we've made these suggestions based on your cuts. We have not hit your number because in order to hit your number, we are impacting students and staff. Because in some of these scenarios, we haven't hit the number yet.
Oh, no, yes.
So I need to know if the board is comfortable with that approach.
Yes.
Mr. Seeley says yes.
Agreed.
With the exercise yet. I think we're going to find out the non-lapsing account, but I think Mr. Brown also pointed out that if we shifted around some things in A and B, that it looks a little differently. So I think we need to finish the math too.
Well, I know, so I guess we do need to finish, and that's why we'll need another meeting, but I need to know what we're asking Dr. Adley to be prepared to come back with us on. Are you looking to hit that number with effects to students or programs, or are we just saying that's off the table?
I think you're saying that it affects students, and we've kind of shown you that, and we've stopped the work. I mean, if they want to proceed with the cuts or reductions in proposed budget, then we'll have to do some harder work on the back end. But I think you made it very clear that if you go that deep into reductions, you're going to start impacting student experience.
Okay, Mrs. Ritchie?
I agree. I think we've completed the task of what was requested of us of the Board of Finance. And I think we go any further, as Dr. Adley said, we're starting to cut into educational services to children. I think we need to know from the Board of Finance what their actual cut will be. And then we'll obviously have to make adjustments as the process moves ahead and we get to the RTM and if there's something further that happens there. So I think right now, I'd like just to have some of those suggestions that I'd made in terms of if these are real cost savings that can be realized in all the scenarios. I'd like to see that carried throughout the scenarios. And then maybe I'm not sure what the next meeting prior to the Board of Finance would look like, but maybe we just sort of fine tune things and give them, and hopefully we'll have clarification on the non-lapsing fund at that point. And hopefully they'll be in favor of that because that would be very helpful and beneficial to the board. Thanks.
Hey, Mr. Burke.
I agree with my colleagues. I think we've given the Board of Finance the kind of process and thinking that they've asked for.
Okay. Mrs. McCammon.
I'd like to ask that the administration take another look at balancing capital, take more, to Katie's point, a 3-year look. We know that the bonding environment is favorable. Are there things that we need to pull forward that we can bond so that we can push other things a little further out and can avoid a bubble? I think we usually try to structure our capital according to really the physical need of the facility, but maybe we can play around with it a little bit based on the current financial conditions and what we expect for the next couple of years.
Mr. Brown?
Again, thank you for all the great work. Sounds like this will be an iterative process between us and the Board of Finance. And I just want to echo what Jill just said. I think we should also have the discussion while we're through this iterative process with the Board of Finance, discussing what funding we can pull forward. I don't know if we can refund munis or how that all works. That's why I'm not on Board of Finance, but would love to work through that and see if there's something we should be examining at this time.
Great. Anybody else? Mr. Maroney?
Yeah, I would just like to echo what most have said. Again, thank you for the work. I think we propose the number that we do. I don't see any advantage to try to bring home the final number and identify the positions by May 6th. I mean, I think we wait, and if the Board of Finance brings a number bigger than we hope for, let's say, then you do that work over the summer. There's no reason to have to rush it by May 6th. So we can wait until the summer to do some more work if that's in fact what the Board of Finance brings down, or the RTM as well. We would have to work with that, but I see no reason to do that by May 6th.
Hey, Tara, I'm sorry to jump in. Just one clarification that when you talked to Mr. Zagorowski, can you look into the HVAC study? Because I vaguely remember that they included that as part of the bonding work that they did before bringing us the request. So
they did, and I'm not sure they knew that it was designed. And so I think we just want to make sure that fits with town guidance, that it can be bonded because it is design rather than work. So yes, we'll have to do that. Any other thoughts? Are we good? We'll move forward. Okay, thank you, everybody. Any personnel action items tonight, Mrs. Sion? Seeing none. Public comment we have received, although I will say my phone has been dinging, so I imagine that it's more public comment. I will try to get that out to you again tonight or tomorrow morning. And with that, may I entertain a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Stein and Mr. Maroney, is there anyone opposed to that motion? Seeing none, the motion will carry unanimously. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your work. Good night.
Thank you, folks. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night, all.
Good night, everybody.